It all kicks off on the loading screen of a game called Tower of Trials, where the attempt to clear the 100th floor is about to begin. Next thing you know, an epic battle is already in full swing, with angels and dragons trading blows in a chaotic scene. In the middle of this mess, a knight sighs, calling the enemies persistent pests and warning them that struggling is pointless. Our protagonist introduces himself, revealing that this armored character is the #1 player in Summoner's Battle, known as Jinugod. Meanwhile, on a forum, people are commenting on how it's a dead game that only veterans play. They even question if Jinugod is a real player or if he uses cheats, but he replies in the chat himself, saying he broke transcendent records and became a legend. Inside the game, another player named Rachel sends a message asking if he's busy, since it's been a while since he cleared the last floor. Seeing everyone in the chat sucking up to him, our protagonist replies that he's a little busy at the moment. Outside the game, the boy walks down the street, messing with his phone and promising himself he'll quit gaming for good as soon as he beats this one. He admits that his real life is a complete mess, because he spent 10 years addicted to games without going to college or getting a decent job. He reflects that his parents never said anything, but they must be devastated on the inside, which is why he decided to quit this dead game and get his life together. Since he's already 24 years old, he feels he needs to act like a normal human being to truly get back on track. Back in the virtual world, his character gears up for the final battle. The goal now is to give his avatar's legendary journey a worthy and successful send-off. Feeling confident, he announces that he's going to clear this final stage so he can finally log off in peace. With the summoning menu open, our protagonist carefully analyzes his inventory on his phone screen. In the game chat, everyone keeps commenting that he must be busy, and Rachel tells everyone to just wait, since he barely even looks at the chat. Without wasting a second, our protagonist activates his ultimate skill, summoning a colossal white whale onto the battlefield. Rachel chimes in again, mentioning it's been exactly 10 years, and wondering what will happen if he finally reaches the 100th floor this time. One of the summoned angels draws its bowstring, firing a devastating energy arrow. The attack rips through the air with absurd force, lighting up the dark scenery and cutting off the messages. The impact creates a massive magical explosion that makes the ground tremble beneath the character's feet. The knight has to brace himself to avoid being blown away by the violent gust of wind caused by the clash of powers. Seeing the scene, the other players in the chat get goosebumps, commenting that they can't quit the game because they have to see this insane ending. The angels continue their relentless advance, firing beams of light at the remaining monstrous enemies. Two of the divine summons land elegantly in the middle of the dust, showing total superiority in combat. A winged enemy tries to resist, but ends up being thrown far away by the brutal impact of the blow. As the dust settles, the knight remains standing calmly, with the enormous whale floating right behind him. The character's face shows no concern as he completely dominates the boss area. The chat goes wild with the display of skill, praising Jinugod, while one of them asks if everyone saw the system announcement. Suddenly, a gigantic red dragon appears, roaring furiously, ready to incinerate everything in its path. The monster unleashes a brutal blast of fire, as a player named Moskomin comments on the legend that a new world would open up for whoever cleared the final floor. The reflection of the flames shines intensely in the knight's eyes, who doesn't flinch one bit in the face of the attack. He immediately counters the assault by summoning a blue dragon made of pure water, which charges forward with its jaws wide open. The aquatic beast collides head-on with the enemy's flames, creating a shockwave across the map. Rachel questions what that strange announcement means, doubting that even the game admins believed anyone would ever clear the tower. The elements continue to fight for dominance in a whirlwind of fire and water, as players joke about the possibility of the change being real. The protagonist's character remains motionless in the center of the chaos, just watching the enemy flames dissipate. A mysterious system message appears on the screen, stating that reality is about to transform into the world of summoners. Right after the warning, a colossal golden explosion fills the screen, signaling the end of the epic battle. In the real world, his phone displays the long-awaited notification, confirming the completion of the 100th floor. The boy throws his arms up in the middle of the street, shouting that he finally managed to beat the tower. People around him stop and stare, weirded out by the shouting and thinking he's lost his mind. Overcome with emotion, he presses the phone to his face, relieved to finally say goodbye to this app that consumed his life. Before uninstalling everything, he decides he's going to brag a little to the veterans in the chat. Suddenly, one of the pedestrians points up, completely confused, asking what that is in the sky. Our protagonist looks up from his phone, curious about the strange reaction from the people on the street. Gigantic blue holographic screens begin to float above the city's buildings, announcing the completion of the 100th floor to the entire world. The messages continue, informing everyone that the beta test was now ending, leaving the population completely baffled. Trying to process what's happening, he wonders why a window identical to the one in his game has appeared in the real sky. All of a sudden, mysterious red scrolls start raining down on the people crossing the street. The crowd begins to pick up the items from the ground, wondering what this weird downpour in the middle of the day is all about. The floating screen changes its message, clearly instructing everyone to tear the summoning scrolls. Two curious students hold the item, thinking it must be some kind of promotional event, and decide to tear it to see what happens. Recognizing the virtual artifact, our protagonist immediately realizes the mortal danger of the situation. Desperate, he reaches out his hand and screams, telling the boy not to tear the scroll under any circumstances. The warning comes too late, and the paper is torn in half by the young student's hands. An intense and violent flash of light engulfs the boy, who lets out an agonizing scream as his body undergoes a gruesome transformation. A new holographic window declares that a new world is opening, leaving our protagonist terrified by the impending chaos. In the student's place, a gigantic and terrifying demonic monster appears, destroying the asphalt around it with its mere presence. Completely frozen, the guy drops his belongings, realizing that the worst of his theories has just become a reality. The boy can't take a single step back as shock takes over his entire body. A woman starts screaming in despair as the city sky turns an apocalyptic and terrifying shade of red. Chaos quickly takes over the streets, with trucks crashing into cars and pedestrians running for their lives amidst the wreckage. People fall gravely injured on the blood-stained asphalt, while survivors scream for someone to call an ambulance. Thrown to the ground and bleeding from his head, our protagonist lets out one last curse against that freaking game before losing consciousness. His phone lies in a pool of blood, displaying the grim screen that declares the beginning of a new era. The scene cuts to a calm hospital room where the news on TV is talking about South Korea's disappointing performance in the international summoner rankings. As the reporter talks about the government's need to acquire high-level summons, the patient's fingers begin to twitch slightly on the sheets. The woman who is peeling an apple in the chair beside him is so startled that the knife slips from her nervous hands. The blade clatters to the floor as she screams for her husband, telling him to run and get a doctor immediately. The boy, who we now learn is named Jinwoo, finally opens his eyes, waking up in a hospital bed with his head completely bandaged. He goes through medical exams, closely watched by his parents, who seem extremely relieved by his awakening. As his vision clears, he processes that the first shocking thing about this story is that 3 years have passed since the day of the accident on the street. The second discovery is that the bizarre scene of the game turning into reality before he passed out wasn't just some crazy dream, as a little monster is carrying things nearby. He calmly watches through the window and concludes that the small stone golem is his father's low-level summon, helping with routine deliveries. On the news, the player Rachel appears in an interview, stating that hunters from all over the world are looking for Jinugod to be able to climb the Tower of Trials. Lying in his hospital bed, our protagonist watches the report and silently concludes that this highly sought-after player is none other than him. The reporter continues Rachel's statement, warning that if this guy shows up, the world will be turned upside down once again. Watching the woman on the screen, he is absolutely certain that she is the real Rachel, who is part of the 5 Emperors of the Heavens in the original game. Suddenly, a blue holographic screen appears right in front of the boy, asking if he wishes to start the system tutorial. He lets out a nervous laugh as he looks at the floating window, still trying to digest the fact that this virtual world has truly become his reality. His mother hugs him worried and tells him he doesn't need to start this test right away, recommending he rest a bit more. But Jinwoo assures her that his body feels great, asking his family not to worry, as he needs to adapt to this new life as quickly as possible. Full of determination, he gets out of bed confident that when it comes to this game, he is absolutely certain he is the best in the entire world. After being discharged, the young man returns home and sits in front of his computer, noticing how radically everything has changed. To better understand the situation, he spends a good amount of time studying this new reality, where his old hobby is no longer just harmless fun. The entire game system, like duels and the dangerous dungeons of the Tower of Trials, has completely migrated to the physical world. 3 years have passed since that incident, and now humanity has apparently found a way to coexist with these summoned entities. Despite all these changes, Jinwoo analyzes the situation and concludes that no one will ever be able to reach his absurd level of experience. Ready to act, he opens the system window, accessing his inventory with the intention of finally setting things in motion. The system announces the start of the tutorial, and right after, our protagonist is already walking through a quiet place. As planned, he chose to go to a completely deserted park to avoid unwanted attention. Although it was a pain to walk to the middle of nowhere, he thought it best not to risk manifesting a dangerous summon in the middle of ordinary people. Holding the low-level scrolls he received as a reward, the boy feels that this whole crazy situation is finally starting to seem real. Staring at the magic paper, he secretly hopes the system will grant him at least one decent creature to start with. Even though he's the greatest living legend of that universe, he knows all too well that starting the journey with a low-class piece of junk would be a recipe for disaster. Back in the day, the game was a true gacha nightmare, where the chances of getting something good from a basic scroll were minuscule. Closing his eyes, he begs to hit the jackpot, earnestly asking for anything that is even minimally viable. His hope is to get a D-rank creature, but he quickly lowers his expectations, accepting that a functional E-rank would be just fine. Without wasting any more time, the boy tears the red item, activating the manifestation process immediately. The paper begins to glow in Jinwoo's hands, making him curious about what this spell will look like in real life. Rays of dark energy start to leak from the cracks of the torn scroll as the power concentrates. An intense burst of light forces the boy to cover his face to protect himself from the gust of wind generated by the magical force. Completely shocked by the power of the summon, he takes a step back, impressed by the spectacle of blue lights. The pieces of the scroll turn to dust, as the system finally processes the player's identity to reveal the result of the roll. To everyone's surprise, the system announces the arrival of a special-class wind fairy, who appears yawning as if she just woke up. Jinwoo's jaw drops as he mentally questions if this X-rank even existed in the original game data. The small, blonde-haired creature rubs her eyes, still trying to understand where she has ended up. Suddenly, the fairy gets a huge shock as she looks at her own hands, realizing she has finally been summoned for real. Standing there, the boy finds the whole thing incredible and at the same time bizarre, not knowing that creatures could talk like that. Trying to understand the situation, he watches the fairy attentively, waiting to see what she'll do next. The little one flies towards him and asks hesitantly if he happens to be the player known as Ramba. Hearing him deny it with the argument that he is a fairy, the creature's eyes widen, remembering that there was only one person who used that nickname. The fairy's face lights up with pure excitement as she shouts, asking if he is the famous Jinwoo god. Unable to contain her emotion, she throws herself at the boy's face, crying because she missed him, while he awkwardly tries to calm the situation. Watching the little crybaby, our protagonist starts to recall old memories about this E-rank fairy. Back then, he used a system loophole to turn this basic support into an absurd attack speed machine, and ended up nicknaming his partner Ramba. The problem is, the boy clearly remembers that this specific unit had been deleted from the game during a bug fix in the first year. At that time, the company released an official notice, suspending its use precisely because of this flaw that broke the game's balance. Reading the information on the blue screen, Jinwoo notices that her current status is classified as under quarantine due to balance-breaking elements. Sobbing, Ramba tells him she was dragged into a bizarre void and locked in a cage, begging for them to stay together forever this time. The boy gently holds the fairy with his fingers, asking her to take it easy and explain this story properly. Curious about this imprisonment information, he asks who exactly put the creature in this state of quarantine. Ramba puts a finger to her chin, trying to jog her memory to remember the details of that confinement. Suddenly, she clutches her head, letting out a scream of agony from a sharp, sudden pain. The fairy cries, saying the pain is unbearable, and that there seems to be some kind of cognitive seal blocking her memories. Realizing the seriousness of the problem, Jinwoo gives up on forcing the issue and asks her to tell him only what she can remember without feeling pain. Wiping away her tears, the little one apologizes for the limitation and reveals that all of them were placed in absolute isolation, where they could never be summoned normally. Our protagonist catches the plural in her sentence and asks if there are other units in quarantine besides her. Ramba confirms his suspicion, reporting that there were definitely other entities trapped in the same mysterious area, leading the boy to deduce there could be a total of 10. It clicks in Jinwoo's mind as he realizes an absurd connection that seemed impossible until that moment. He deduces that these prisoners are the exact 10 specific summons that were marked as bugs and deleted while he was using them in the past. His reasoning goes further, speculating that all these banned units have been reclassified as a special rank and are now responding directly to his call. Looking at the ground, the young man comments to himself that it's been a long time since he felt the thrill of using a low-level scroll, and finds this whole situation insane. Holding the second red item, he concludes with absolute certainty that he is the only person on the entire planet capable of summoning these exiled creatures. The boy tears the second scroll, speculating if this guaranteed success rate is a hidden reward for clearing the tower. The magical light shines again, and the system congratulates the player for summoning a hairy gorilla, which flexes its muscles with a roar. Jinwoo's expression immediately deflates upon seeing the F-rank creature, confirming that the rare cards still depend purely on his gacha luck. Getting back to his strategy, our protagonist determines that the plan remains the same. He needs to burn through as many scrolls as possible to recover his banned squad. He plans to rescue every single one of his old partners to become even more invincible than he was at his peak. The fairy agrees excitedly, calling her boss by his famous nickname, while the gorilla stands behind them watching the conversation. Jinwoo cuts off Ramba's enthusiasm, ordering her to stop using that game name and to just call him by his real name, leaving the little one confused. He patiently explains that, thanks to the 5 emperors, that old nickname has become world famous. Despite all his tactical knowledge, the boy recognizes that he spent 3 years in a coma and has no idea how vulnerable he currently is. With a serious look, he warns that if news gets out that Jinugod commands exiled summons, it would paint a giant target on his back. A strong gust of wind rustles the leaves of the park trees, bringing a sudden atmosphere of tension to the calm environment. Purple lightning begins to crackle in the air around the group, catching our protagonist completely off guard with the sudden change in atmosphere. The gorilla lets out a warning cry while the fairy shrinks back, scared, not understanding what's causing all the dark wind. A new holographic window appears, announcing the advance to the next phase and the immediate generation of the basic tutorial dungeon. A swirling dimensional portal opens right in front of them in the middle of the park, making the boy complain indignantly about the system's rush. Jinwoo clenches his fists, annoyed at having to physically enter that portal after already clearing thousands of dungeons in the game. But he soon reconsiders, thinking that doing this in reality is a completely different and much more dangerous experience. Trying to stay calm, he takes a deep breath to focus on the objective, reminding himself that this is just a tutorial and he won't have to engage in direct combat. The system displays a warning instructing player Beak Jinwoo to proceed to the dungeon entrance. With the little fairy floating and the muscular gorilla behind him, the boy enters the portal, prepared to adapt to this new, distorted reality. After crossing the dimensional barrier, our protagonist walks through the dark cave, trying to get used to the oppressive environment. The rocky and poorly lit scenery makes the boy comment that the place is genuinely creepy to explore in person. A system screen confirms his entry into the beginner's dungeon, indicating that the challenge has finally begun. Stopping in his tracks, he opens the player interface, muttering to himself that it's time to get down to business. On the team panel, the system instructs that dungeon combat requires forming a team with summons, leaving the player with empty slots to fill. The screen also informs that the maximum team limit is 5 summons and shows 2 monsters about to face off. The system asks if he wishes to assign the X-Class Wind Fairy and the F-Class Hairy Gorilla to the main team. As he presses the confirmation button, Jinwoo reflects that normally, a player would come with a full group of 5 summons to increase their chances of success. Entering a dungeon with only 2 summons might seem like a completely reckless and suicidal move to most people. However, the boy remains calm, remembering that he has tested this exact strategy tens of thousands of times in the past. Confident, he confirms the team, stating that the path through this dungeon is already perfectly mapped out in his head. The fairy lets out an excited little yelp while the gorilla beats its chest, roaring, right after the system confirms their automatic summoning. The boy observes the back of the cave, prepared to encounter the monsters that should appear in the basic tutorial. A deep growl echoes through the darkness, making Jinwoo hold his breath as danger approaches. The system issues an alert, warning that a famished gray wolf is roaming the area and that the mission is to defeat the beast to escape the cave. Looking into the shadows, our protagonist recognizes the monster as an F-Class gray wolf and prepares for combat. Suddenly, a golden flash illuminates the boy's body, surprising him as the system activates a protection function. The message informs him that a shield has been generated for the player, leaving Jinwoo surrounded by a sparkling, glowing barrier. He analyzes the situation, noting that the player protection system from Summoner's Battle has been implemented identically to the game version. But a new system alert throws a wrench in his sense of security, warning that it will be a permanent game over if the shield is broken. The gigantic wolf with glowing red eyes emerges from the shadows, growling fiercely as it prepares to attack. Without wasting a second, Jinwoo points at the beast, ordering his gorilla nicknamed Tialgo to advance against the enemy. The problem is, the enormous hairy gorilla starts walking way too slowly, beating its fists on its chest and striking an intimidating pose with no sense of urgency. Seeing his partner's absurd slowness, our protagonist gets frustrated with the F-class's speed, but quickly adds that he was expecting this. Prepared for the situation, he calls Ramba by name, asking the little fairy to step in. The fairy gives an excited smile and spins her small staff, creating a green magic circle that casts the wind's haste ability. The magic hits Tialgo squarely, enveloping the gorilla's body in an intense emerald aura that drastically increases its speed. Feeling the energy flow, the gorilla's eyes widen and glow as its muscles tense under the effect of the buff. The big guy charges like a bolt of lightning through the rocky scenery, kicking up dust and roaring furiously at the enemy. Jinwoo observes the result with satisfaction, praising Ramba and remembering that this was exactly the efficiency he expected from the fairy. The gray wolf notices the swift approach and growls in response, preparing for the imminent impact. The boy notes that the enemy beast seems much larger and more intimidating up close than he remembered from the game screen. But he trusts in his ally's strength, muttering that Tialgo won't lose this fight no way. According to his perfect calculations, there was no possibility of defeat, but the uncertainty of reality still made him a little anxious about the impending clash. The wolf leaps to bite the enemy's neck, while the gorilla intercepts the attack with a powerful roar in midair. The impact of the wolf's fangs throws the gorilla to the ground, sending blood flying and making the ape roar in pain from the brutal wound. The enemy monster dominates the situation, sinking its teeth into Tialgo's arm, who struggles uselessly against the cave floor. Seeing the situation spiral out of control, Jinwoo desperately calls for Ramba, needing more support to save the gorilla. The little fairy obeys instantly, shouting that she's swinging her staff as hard as she can to send more magic power. A new green buff hits the ape's fist, enveloping its hand in a spiral of sharp and powerful energy. Strengthened by the magic, Tialgo manages to break free, letting out an enraged roar before retaliating with a devastating blow. The wind-charged punch hits the wolf squarely, sending the heavy beast flying against the rock wall with absurd force. Ramba floats gracefully in the air, her staff glowing intensely as she channels even more energy and declares the end of the battle. The green aura intensifies, covering the gorilla's entire body as it gets up, roaring, ready to deliver the final blow. Without giving the enemy a chance to react, the ape pounces on the wolf, unleashing a sequence of brutal punches. Tialgo's blows land like meteors, kicking up dust and echoing a violent boom throughout the cave. The force of the impacts is so absurd that it makes the ground tremble while rocks fall from the ceiling. Jinwoo lets out a long sigh, trying to calm his racing heart, while the fairy lowers her staff, panting beside him. The gray wolf's lifeless body lies stretched out on the ground, and the gorilla raises its arms, panting after winning the intense fight. With its body still covered in the magical aura, the ape beats its chest and lets out a thunderous roar, announcing its overwhelming victory. Ramba celebrates joyfully, flying around our protagonist, who also allows himself a sigh of relief for having won the first challenge. The dungeon cleared notification appears on the screen, granting 2 low-level runes of strength as a reward for survival. After a long day of work, a girl named Ajin says goodbye to her boss, thanking her and saying she'll be back next time, as Jamsil Tower glows in the background in the evening light. She counts the cash she received, letting out a surprised whistle for having earned a whopping 200,000 won in just that one day. This smiling young woman holding a wad of cash is none other than our protagonist Jinwoo's younger sister. She explains that 3 years ago, after the world changed, she ended up getting a new profession as a rune hunter. Her routine basically consists of exploring low-level dungeons and selling the runes she finds to promising and wealthy players. The decision to enter this dangerous line of work came because her family faced terrible financial difficulties right after her brother's tragic accident. Putting the money in her purse, Ajin explains that she got very lucky, finding a medium-class summoning scroll in one of her first explorations, which granted her a shadow elf and has allowed her to make a steady income ever since. The phone in her pocket starts ringing and she looks at the screen, a bit confused to see that the call is from her older brother. The girl answers in the middle of the street, asking if he was finally discharged from the hospital. Jinwoo confirms the information, but then immediately changes the tone of the conversation, telling her he heard from their dad that she's become a rune street peddler. Annoyed by the term, Ajin loses her patience and yells into the phone, demanding that he stop using that ridiculous expression and call her by her proper title of Rune Hunter, while Jinwoo pulls the phone away from his ear in surprise. The boy recovers from the shouting and tries to change the subject, asking if his sister knows where the nearest synthesis center is, and she finds the question strange. With the fairy floating beside him, our protagonist awaits the answer as a holographic map appears, showing the player's zones scattered across the world. He knows that the zones were born as specialized centers to handle summoners' business right after the towers appeared across the globe. Inside a sophisticated coffee shop, his sister answers Jinwoo's question matter-of-factly. She explains that Jamsil and Hindi Towers became the official towers of trials, and that the player zone he's looking for only exists in those two places. By a window with a view of the city, the girl concludes by saying that it varies depending on the country, but in Korea, these facilities are restricted to those specific locations, and he understands the information. Jinwoo reflects on her answer, thinking it makes sense for these facilities to be near the towers to facilitate exploration, since they concentrate dungeons and synthesis centers in a single place. Still chatting in the coffee shop, Ajin rests her chin on her hands and asks what rank the first summons he got in the tutorial were. Jinwoo takes a sip of his drink and tries to hide the truth, saying he got an E rank and an F rank. Hearing this, his sister smiles, relieved, commenting that the drop rate for E rank is only 5%, which means he was pretty lucky right off the bat. He smiles back and agrees that he was indeed very lucky, though he internally knows he's lying about the fairy being X rank so as not to worry her. Changing the subject, the young man says he'll need her help because he wants to adapt to the system as quickly as possible, and she retorts in an ironic tone, saying she'll give him an allowance later since she makes way more money than her older brother. Taking the last sip from his cup, Jinwoo gives a smirk and replies, telling his little sister not to underestimate him, as he might just become the greatest player in the world one day. Ajin scoffs and rolls her eyes, commenting that lately, everyone talks as if they're the next chosen one to surpass legendary players like Rachel or Genos. He looks down with a mysterious smile on his lips, just muttering to himself if that's really how things are. Not paying much attention to his strange attitude, the girl gets up from her chair and tells him to just follow her, leading the way. Walking beside her, our protagonist confesses that he's very curious to see with his own eyes what this famous player zone everyone talks about is like. The pair arrives in front of the imposing Jamsil Tower, which glows against the night sky, surrounded by an intense magical aura. As they walk through the illuminated plaza, Ajin breaks the silence and asks what kind of E-rank summon he managed to pull earlier. Jinwoo casually replies that it was a wind fairy, and the girl finds it strange, saying she's never heard of that unit before and asks to see it. The young man immediately refuses, denying the request, but his sister insists, pulling on his jacket sleeve and complaining that they're not strangers and that the summon won't be consumed if used outside of battle. After much insistence, he gives in a little and proposes a deal, saying he'll only show the fairy if she shows him her summon first, and she agrees on the spot, extending her hand to summon her partner. Ajin smiles smugly and begins to channel her magic, warning her brother not to be too shocked by what he's about to see. Jinwoo watches with a disinterested expression, wondering where all that confidence comes from if she only has a C-rank partner. A purplish magic circle forms, and a shadow elf with platinum hair and dark clothes emerges majestically in the middle of the light. His sister notices the boy's lack of reaction, who just lets out a mumble and gets offended by his apathetic look. Annoyed, she explains that Jinwoo doesn't understand anything about the rules of this new world, where summons from C-rank and up are considered the nobility among players. Our protagonist listens to the explanation without giving a darn about this nobility talk, remembering that in the original game, he only used C-rank units as disposable material to feed and level up stronger summons in the fusion center. To break the tense mood, Jinwoo waves at the elf and asks if she can speak Korean, but the creature remains completely silent. Ajin pulls her brother's arm, indignant, wanting to know why on earth he's trying to chat with her summon, and he replies with complete innocence that he just wanted to greet the creature and ask it to take good care of his little sister. The girl looks at him as if he's crazy, questioning since when summons can talk. The boy freezes for a second, realizing his blunder, and repeats his sister's question, shocked by the information that the monsters are apparently mute in real life. As he processes this, Ramba starts screaming from inside, demanding to be let out and complaining that she missed him so much, calling Jinwoo's name in a huge fuss. The muffled scream sends a chill down Ajin's spine, while her brother breaks into a cold sweat, remembering that the chatty little fairy hasn't shut up since the moment they met. He tries to smooth things over, arguing that since the fairy could talk in the game, he just assumed all humanoid creatures would have the same ability in real life, never imagining Ramba was a special case. His sister crosses her arms and declares that it's his turn to show his summon, but Jinwoo refuses, saying he'll save it for later, turning his face to hide his tension. Ajin gets annoyed because she already showed hers, but the boy keeps walking along the promenade, thinking it's not a good idea to attract attention in the middle of the street and promising himself he needs to be careful with Ramba's chattiness, at least for now. Ajin complains about her brother's stalling and calls him a cheater as she runs to catch up and take the lead, pointing the way. As they turn the corner, Jinwoo comes face to face with the player zone and is left speechless by the grandeur of the place and its vibrant lights. The Jamsil Plaza, which was once an ordinary park, is now crowded with hunters walking around with their bizarre summons, and the boy can hardly believe this transformation really happened. His sister agrees, nodding, and explains that right after the Tower of Trials appeared in the middle of the city, corporations demolished everything around it to build this specialized center. He points to the themed amusement park right next to the sinister tower and asks who in their right mind would want to have fun in a place with such a depressing atmosphere. Ajin shrugs, justifying that it just makes the park experience more thrilling, and that the real dungeons ended up settling in that area. The boy retorts that thrilling here means actually kicking the bucket and mentally questions who would come to have fun with a risk of not making it out. But the girl ends the discussion by saying that, in the end, it ended up making sense for the region's economy. Jinwoo admits to himself that exploring dungeons was terrifying, but he soon cracks a smile upon recognizing several structures he only saw in the game, now built in real life. With his eyes sparkling at the glowing signs of the shops and enhancement centers, he confesses that this whole situation is honestly very exciting. The young man watches from a distance as the trade stalls full of players negotiate, while his sister confirms that this is the trading hub where everything from scrolls to valuable runes is freely sold. Seeing the people trading, our protagonist is overcome with nostalgia, remembering when he used to spend the whole day tearing scrolls and buying runes at will, without worrying about the cost, thanks to the funding from the rich player named Baekshin. Bursting the boy's bubble, Ajin points to a pamphlet and warns him that he's still just a beginner, advising her brother to visit the academy run by the player Central to learn the basics. She insists that he needs to learn the step-by-step process calmly before going off and doing something stupid, but Jinwoo refuses the offer, stating that he has nothing to learn and no questions to ask about this world. The girl takes a deep breath, saying that if that's how it is, she'll go her own way and start hunting for runes, asking one more time if he's sure he'll be okay on his own. He gives a calm smile and tells his little sister to go on ahead, thanking her for the tour as she walks away, still a bit hesitant to leave someone who just got out of the hospital alone in the middle of the chaos. Jinwoo waves goodbye and says he's just going to take another look around the area before leaving, and Ajin gives a restrained nod. As she walks away, the girl reflects that her brother has been acting very strangely since they met, almost as if he's been possessed by something, doubting that he's 100% okay after waking up from the coma. However, she tries to think positively, believing he's just trying to do his best in his own way, but she shouts from a distance for him not to overdo it and to call if he needs any help. The young man thanks her for her concern and enters a dark alley, away from the main hustle and bustle, making sure no one is following him. As soon as he verifies that the alley is empty and safe, he summons his partner, calling Ramba by name. The Wind Fairy appears in a flash of magic and wastes no time, screaming Jinwoo's name at the top of her lungs in a shrill cry. The boy is completely startled and tells the little one to shut up instantly, putting a finger to his lips to signal for silence. He grabs the fairy with both hands, muffling her screams as he looks around desperately, hoping no one on the main street heard the commotion. With wide eyes, Jinwoo scolds his partner, warning her in a scary tone that from that moment on, she is forbidden to speak while they are outside. Ramba nods her head repeatedly, her eyes full of tears, as the young man lets go of the fairy, reminding her that they can't attract anyone's attention and that conversations should only happen inside dungeons. He sits on an alley step, sighing wearily after the scare, and comments that if he wants to start exploring dungeons seriously, he'll need to get some starting capital somehow. The boy pulls his phone from his pocket and opens the banking app to check his balance, and the screen shows exactly 12,501, which is next to nothing. He leans his head against the wall and mutters a lament about his own life, while analyzing his precarious financial situation. Jinwoo remembers that he blew all his savings on games in the past, and thinks that wasting time on odd jobs now would be a waste, questioning if there's any rock bottom lower than this. Annoyed with his own stupidity for not saving money, he lowers his head, cursing his luck, while Ramba floats beside him, trying to understand her boss's bad mood. He knows anyone would tell him to just ask his parents for help, but he quickly dismisses the idea, calling it crazy. The young man hasn't forgotten that his family went through tough times and knows that his parents are working themselves to the bone at 3 different jobs just to keep the house running after his accident. Jinwoo recalls his mother's tired features and feels that asking her for money now would be a disgusting act that would make him feel worse than a monster. Resolved, he puts his phone away and raises his head, stating with conviction that he will find a way to climb up in life, starting from scratch. After all, what made the legendary Jinugod an unparalleled player on the server was precisely his absurd dedication in an unfair game that forced players to spend fortunes. Even under so much pressure from big shots like Baekhyun and the heavy gacha mechanics, Jinwoo was the only one who managed to evolve and become the best in the world without spending a single cent of real money. With a sharp gaze, our protagonist promises himself that if he managed to dominate that infernal system in the past, he will be able to climb the rankings once again, even if it's in real life. Suddenly, his phone vibrates in his pocket with a notification from the bank, informing him that a deposit of 500,000 won has just landed in his account, catching the boy by surprise. Jinwoo is shocked by the amount, looking at Ramba, confused, and wondering where on earth this money came from since he didn't do anything, speculating if it's some kind of benefit for new players. Right after, a message from his mother arrives, explaining that Ajin told her he was planning to start playing again, and since she knows her son's proud personality, she knew he would never ask for money, so she sent this allowance to help him get started. Reading the affectionate words, the young man freezes with the screen glowing on his face, calling out for his mom in a choked whisper. He feels the weight of that sacrifice, remembering all the time his mother took care of him in the hospital without having any money to spare, facing extreme hardships just to keep him alive. The memories of her calloused hands holding his in his hospital bed flood Jinwoo's mind, along with her gentle words asking him to wake up. In his memory, his mother hugged him with eyes full of tears while he was still in a coma, begging for her son to just be healthy again. Tears form in the boy's eyes, and he silently thanks his mother with a heavy heart, promising that he will not waste this second chance. Clenching his fist with determination, Jinwoo promises himself that he will definitely achieve success. With a focused look, he affirms that he will ensure his entire family lives surrounded by luxury in the future. Observing the holographic shop window, the boy reflects that the other players had a 3-year head start and that every second is precious to reach the top. Knowing that he needs to act like the best to earn that title, he deduces that the only way to gather growth materials is by exploring dungeons. Holding a handful of glowing scrolls, our protagonist decides that the first step is to assemble a team by buying 3 low-level summons. The system displays the results, showing that he obtained a slime mass and a horned butterfly, both F-rank, followed by an E-rank poison lizard. Sitting with his new creatures, the young man considers himself very lucky to have pulled an E-rank, considering the low probability of the gacha. Looking at the small reptile, he assesses that the cost-effectiveness of a poison monster is quite decent for the start of the journey. However, upon facing the weird jelly, he lets out a sigh of disgust, deciding he will use this piece of junk for a while before discarding it at the synthesis center. With the team formed by the monkey, fairy, lizard, butterfly, and slime, Jinwoo mentally reviews the cycle of getting summons, trading runes, fighting, and evolving. Smiling confidently, he concludes that the growth system boils down to farming runes and tearing scrolls, stating that he can handle that grinding routine any day. Imagining the ultimate power of his complete team, he is certain that if he gathers the 10 band X ranks, he will be able to sweep even the 100th floor of the Tower of Trials. Taking the first step, he sets his main goal, to find all the rest of the exiled units. Walking down the illuminated street with Ramba on his shoulder, our protagonist announces that now all that's left is to face the real exploration. Taking out his phone, he opens the Maps app in search of a place to hunt, determining that the priority is to find a dungeon entrance. Reminiscing about the old days, Jinwoo comments that in the mobile game you just had to tap the screen to start a stage, and laments that it's not that easy in real life. Walking through the city streets, he wonders what the exploration dynamic is like in this new physical world. Suddenly, the boy stops walking and lets out a confused mumble upon seeing something strange up ahead. He comes across a restricted barrier surrounded by guards and is in shock, asking what the heck that is. Trembling with his phone in hand, our protagonist frustratedly realizes that just having a summoned creature isn't enough to go out hunting. Reading a beginner's guide online, he is shocked to discover that no one can simply enter the dimensional rifts, even if they have summons ready for battle. The article explains that the gates appear randomly all over Korea, and that it's possible to gauge the difficulty of each one by the energy they emit. But the government's rules have changed, now requiring strict regulation that bars the entry of any unauthorized person, even in the easiest dungeons. The guide's illustration makes it very clear that only those who are officially registered as players have legal permission to access these locations. Defeated by this unexpected bureaucracy, Jinwoo sits on an illuminated bench, letting out a long, heavy sigh. Holding his face in his hands, he grumbles about his own bad luck, questioning why he had to wake up right after the laws changed. Suddenly, his phone screen lights up, showing his little sister's name calling him. Trying to cheer up her master, the little fairy flies to his face and tells him to hang in there and not give up. Looking at his partner's effort, the boy cracks a gentle smile, feeling his spirits slowly lift. He gives Ramba a caring pat on the head, thanking her for the moral support in that moment of frustration. Answering the call, our protagonist brings the device to his ear, still a bit down. On the other end of the line, Ajin asks how her older brother is doing from the comfort of her room in the family's apartment. Lying in bed flipping through a book, the girl asks what time he plans to come home, as their mother wanted to know the plans for dinner. Jinwoo tells her he'll eat out and takes the opportunity to ask his sister about this bureaucratic rule that player registration comes before exploration. The young woman jumps up in bed, slapping her forehead as she realizes the important detail she forgot to mention. With a drop of sweat on his forehead, the boy asks if she hid it from him on purpose, but Ajin swears up and down that she just forgot about the new law. Explaining the situation, she comments that this regulation was established recently because too many people were getting wiped out in dungeons, forcing the government to intervene severely. The girl agrees, reporting that the scene before was complete chaos, which is why there are now officials guarding the entrances at all times. Scratching his chin, our protagonist deduces that this whole tedious process of tests and battles for registration basically serves to control the exact number of active hunters. He reasons that if everyone decides to become a player, blinded by the promise of easy money, the entire social system would inevitably collapse. Changing the subject, Ajin reminds her brother about the existence of a world ranking system, piquing the boy's curiosity. She explains that the system ranks the top 100 nationally and internationally, lamenting that Korea is at such a miserable level that it doesn't even appear on the global list, which is led by Rachel. When the girl comments that the country would level up if the legendary Jinugod finally appeared, the young man breaks into a cold sweat and quickly ends the call, making up some excuse. The boy lowers his phone, letting out a heavy sigh due to the pressure of having his old nickname mentioned once again. Walking back through the illuminated streets, he decides that he has prepared everything he needed and that the best thing to do is just rest for the remainder of the day. The next morning, the pot is already simmering on the stove as the sun lights up the family's kitchen. The mother prepares breakfast while the father reads the newspaper at the table in a tranquil domestic atmosphere. The father lowers his newspaper when the door opens, revealing Jinwoo already dressed and ready to leave with his backpack on. The boy says he needs to leave early, surprising his mother that he's already up at 6 in the morning. Worried, she kneels at the entrance, asking him to at least take a rice ball, but the young man refuses while tying his shoelaces. With his sneakers firmly on his feet, he takes a brief pause before opening the doorknob. Turning his head, he calls to his parents in a soft, respectful tone of voice. Giving a sincere smile, Jinwoo apologizes for only showing his bad side all these years and thanks them for all the care he received. After his declaration, he says goodbye and leaves, closing the door and leaving the two adults completely emotional about his change in attitude. The father scratches his blushing cheek, finding his son's attitude a bit embarrassing, but soon asks his wife if the boy will really be okay on this new path. Watching the news on her phone about hunters getting taken out in dungeons, the mother tries to reassure her husband, reminding him that the government now requires safety training. At the testing center, Jinwoo reads the news on his phone, lamenting the number of people who got wiped out just because of delusions of grandeur. With a drop of sweat on his face, he admits he doesn't have much room to judge addicts after spending 10 years sunk in the game, but he still finds it pathetic that people ignore the real danger of getting finished. The line moves forward at the reception desk, and the receptionist calls the next applicant, pulling the boy from his thoughts. Handing in the filled-out form, he states that there is his application, and the woman confirms receipt, starting the official process. Taking the opportunity, our protagonist curiously asks how many people will receive official qualification in that day's test. The woman informs him that only 50 people will acquire the title, making Jinwoo break into a cold sweat when he notices there are easily over 1,000 people in line behind him. Walking towards the testing area, he adjusts his backpack, reflecting on the brutal competition. Observing the colossal crowd of candidates below, the boy affirms that if he can't pass a basic test like this on the first try, his legend would be a sham. With a confident smile, he ironically wonders if he could be considered one of the 5 emperors of the heavens if he failed a little government exam. The scene changes to the interior of an association base, where examiners in suits evaluate the candidates' papers in a luxurious setting. One of the men throws a pile of forms on the table, questioning the logic of selecting only 50 successful applicants from so many people. A judge named Park Chang-seok takes a sip of iced coffee and comments that if the association really wanted to discover new talent, they should open up many more spots. Annoyed with the bureaucracy, the big guy slams the table, breaking everything around him as he bellows that the system isn't progressing because of the old-timers pulling the strings behind the scenes. The shock of the impact makes another employee scream in terror, but soon a loud bang at the door alerts everyone to an unexpected intrusion. Walking calmly down the damaged hallway, a shadowy figure calls the judge by name in a threatening tone of voice. The intruder in a purple suit appears, accompanied by a monstrous orc, accusing the examiner of having taken out his brothers and questioning his calmness in the face of it. Park Chang-seok turns his head, gritting his teeth and cursing the lunatic scumbag who just invaded the base. Without hesitation, the bearded man charges forward and crosses his arms, blocking a brutal sneak attack with his magical energy. Engulfed in intense flames, the judge gets into a battle stance alongside his armored knight, Fire Wolf, and a one-eyed bird, ready to destroy the villain in the purple suit. One of the candidates runs in terror, questioning why a gang decided to invade the testing base right then and there. Jinwoo's eyes widen, confused by the sudden commotion, asking what the heck is going on. The sunlit room is filled with tension as the examiner and the intruder face each other amidst the rubble. Sitting calmly in his chair, our protagonist crosses his legs and mutters that this whole situation is completely insane. The people around him start to gather nervously, not understanding what's suddenly happening. Some candidates break into a cold sweat, asking if they're going to get finished there, but a young man in a jacket tries to calm the others, saying that Judge Park Chang-seok is known as a demon for wiping out entire gangs. Without showing any fear, Jinwoo just watches the scene, curious about the confrontation that's about to begin. The big guy smiles devilishly, ironically asking if the gang invaded the place with all this confidence, thinking they could just take everyone out. The situation spirals out of control, and the judge yells, warning that this is an emergency for everyone present in the room. In an authoritative tone, he orders everyone to summon their partners and raise their protection shields immediately. Keeping his cool, our protagonist calls the fairy and tells her to act. The little one obeys instantly, analyzing the situation and conjuring a green holographic barrier around him. Worried about the chatty fairy, he raises a finger and reminds his partner that she promised to stay quiet, and she covers her mouth with both hands, obeying immediately. Satisfied with her obedience, Jinwoo turns his attention back to the fight, without having to worry about scolding her. With a confident smile, the intruder laughs at the situation, mocking the examiner's righteous pose. Without wasting time, the reddish orc charges with a giant axe, destroying the floor with the force of its steps. Crouched behind the counter, the boy concludes that getting involved in the fight would just be an unnecessary headache. With a calculating look, he decides that for now, the best thing to do is just observe how these hunters really fight. Immediately, the examiner's flame turtle shoots 3 violent fireballs towards the orc. The flaming spheres brutally collide with the creature, causing a colossal explosion in the room. When the smoke clears, the monster appears completely unscathed, without even a scratch on its body, just growling and shaking off the dust. The villain bursts out laughing, mocking the turtle and asking if that pathetic attack was all the great judge could muster. Park Chang-seok grinds his teeth, frustrated by the ineffectiveness of the blow as he analyzes the situation. Gripping the edge of the table, Jinwoo immediately notices that the examiner made a basic game reading error. Unable to hold back, he mutters that the guy is complete trash at battles, and the fairy covers her ears, trembling in fear of the scolding her boss is giving from afar. Watching the examiner retreat, our protagonist assesses that he will probably lose the fight if he continues to battle like an amateur. Looking at the people hiding around him, Jinwoo reflects on what he should do in that situation. The orc's axe slams into the ground, destroying the tiles with a terrifying impact. With a bestial roar, the monster starts a spinning attack with its blade, breaking everything in its path and forcing people to retreat in panic. Aware that the gang wouldn't hesitate to massacre ordinary civilians, the boy realizes he would end up getting wiped out along with them if the line of defense was broken. Deciding to intervene, Jinwoo raises his hand and shouts for the examiner to listen over the noise of the destruction. He warns loudly that the timing of the flame turtle's ability is completely off. With a finger raised, the boy tells Park Chang-seok to pay attention to the support flying behind the bloody orc. He points to the small floating monster, explaining that the creature is applying a fire resistance buff to the enemy. Because of this, the turtle could never deal any damage at the moment it shot the fireballs. The judge's eyes widen in shock as he realizes the orc's body turned red precisely when the support in the background used its magic. Getting the message, the big guy immediately summons a wooden ent from the ground as the orc prepares for another strike. Fixing his gaze on the enemy, he waits for the resistance buff to wear off before giving the command at the right moment. When the red glow disappears, the examiner yells, ordering the turtle to attack again with all its strength. The creature obeys in the same second, firing a continuous and overwhelming pillar of fire that burns everything in its path. The flames engulf the orc with absurd power, surprising the judge that the boy's tip worked so perfectly. The villain despairs, shouting curses and wondering how the heck that kid in the corner managed to read his strategy. Without letting up, the ent swings its heavy arms, landing a crushing punch on the ground and destroying the room's floor. The attack creates gigantic roots that crush the flying support, taking out the little creature instantly. With the enemy's resistance broken and the support eliminated, the turtle increases the pressure of the fire even more, completely incinerating the orc. The intensity of the attack is so great that the heat from the blast almost melts the hall's walls. The villain in the purple suit's body is pulled upwards by an invisible force as he screams in desperation, finding it impossible that his monster was destroyed so quickly. Hanging in the air, he begs the examiner to stop, asking for a second to explain the situation. Trembling with fear, he surrenders, yelling that he was wrong and promising to turn himself in if they spare his life. Jinwoo watches the scene in silence, noticing the dark roots enveloping the intruder's body like a deadly trap. Wrapped in the magical plants, the man cries and swears never to get involved in gang stuff again, begging for mercy, and the judge just tells him to shut up in a firm voice. The roots tighten even more as Park Chang-seok coldly states that gang members must be executed on the spot without the right to a trial. The criminal's face contorts in pure terror, letting out a final scream of despair as he realizes his end is certain. With a cold smile on his face, the examiner snaps his fingers to give the final order, confirming that the association's punishment is absolute. In the blink of an eye, the roots dig into the villain's body, gushing blood and tearing him apart without the slightest mercy. The candidates watch the carnage in shock, asking quietly if the nightmare is finally over. A general commotion takes over the room, with people screaming in relief for having survived, praising the examiner's strength and courage. The crowd celebrates the demise of the gang trash, calling the judge a hero, while Jinwoo remains standing in the middle of the chaos with the fairy on his shoulder, not sharing the same joy. He clenches his jaw, perplexed to see how everyone celebrates the brutal killing of a person so naturally, as if it were a spectacle. With a heavy gaze, he concludes that this place is definitely no longer the peaceful world he once knew, realizing that it will be very difficult to survive without acquiring an extreme dose of coldness and determination. With the commotion over, the examiner walks towards our protagonist, getting his attention with a deep voice. The bearded man extends his hand and sincerely thanks him for the valuable tip from before, formally introducing himself as a counselor for the player central. The boy shakes his hand and responds humbly, saying it was nothing and returning the thanks for the protection against the terrorist. Wanting to return the favor, Park Chang-seok asks for permission to inquire which guild Jinwoo currently belongs to, already planning to offer a reward. Our protagonist scratches the back of his neck, a bit awkwardly, and confesses that he hasn't registered with the association yet and asks if there's any problem with not having an affiliation. The examiner is stunned, wondering how a mere unregistered novice could recognize a summon buff with a single glance amidst thousands of possible units, and warns that the boy needs to present at least a civil ID. Jinwoo takes his ID card from his pocket, and the judge receives it, cordially thanking him for his cooperation. The bearded man explains that after a background check, he will be properly rewarded according to the regulations. Smiling, the boy says he'll leave things in his hands and says goodbye, turning his back to leave the headquarters. Park Chang-seok watches the young man's back with a serious and analytical gaze, trying to unravel the true capability of that mysterious beginner. He takes his phone out of his pocket and calls the headquarters with a new mission in mind. When they answer on the other end, he confirms his own identity and says that he has just sent some data about a new candidate. Staring fixedly at the exit door, he dictates the name Baek Jinwoo, asking his subordinate to investigate the boy thoroughly. Walking through the bustling streets, our protagonist leaves the headquarters with the ferry yawning on his head, unconcerned about the investigation he has just triggered. The sunlight illuminates the city as he prepares to finally face the exploration of dungeons in this new and merciless real world. Back at the plaza, Jinwoo sits on a bench and offers a huge cream-filled bun to the starving fairy. Ramba's eyes sparkle with happiness, and she grabs the snack with both hands, thinking it must have been frustrating not being able to open her mouth this whole time. Chewing the bun enthusiastically, she gets cream all over herself while the boy laughs at his partner's simplicity, feeling a bit of peace amidst the chaos. He reflects that he's heard other hunters live to argue with their own summons, and thinks it's nice that the fairy is so happy with just a piece of bread. Leaning back on the bench, our protagonist murmurs that nothing bad will happen to them from now on, while his partner eats peacefully. His gaze darkens as he remembers the carnage from earlier, and he admits he didn't plan on intervening in the fight against the giant orc. But he also recognizes that if he hadn't given the tip, the people hiding back there would have probably been incinerated. Letting out a long sigh, Jinwoo looks up at the sky, illuminated by the trees, and concludes that this world has changed much more than he imagined. With sharp eyes, he decrees that he can no longer postpone his hunts, accepting that he needs to get strong as quickly as possible to survive. The young man's first priority is to gather enough scrolls to bring back the explosive dragon mage and the training instructor, and strengthen his team for good. Smiling confidently, he remembers that these two exiled units are D and E rank, which means they can be easily rescued with low-level scrolls. With a full belly, the fairy plops down on the bench, all covered in cream, burping with satisfaction after the hearty snack. The boy gets up and dusts off his clothes, prepared to follow through with his plan. With an excited smile, he invites Ramba to continue their stroll, calling his partner to walk with him. As the pair walks through the city, the modern buildings contrast with the new reality of hunters that has spread everywhere. In a closed room, Examiner Park Chang-seok answers the phone, indignant, asking his subordinate to repeat the information. He asks if the reason the boy wasn't registered yet is because he spent the last 3 years in a coma after a traffic accident. The man strokes his beard, remembering that it was exactly 3 years ago that the world turned upside down, and that accidents during the initial chaos were extremely frequent, so the story does make some sense. But he freaks out right after, shouting into the phone when he finds out that the kid filled out the registration form the exact moment he left the hospital. With the papers in hand, the judge stares at Baek Jinwoo's form, trying to process that absurd speed of adaptation. He mutters if that's even real, not believing that anyone in their right mind would do such a thing. The subordinate on the other end of the line asks if he found any serious problems with the candidate's file, but the man immediately denies it. Trying to hide his shock, Park Chang-seok orders them to make the boy his exclusive examinee for that month, and hangs up without much explanation. Holding the phone close to his face, the examiner is amazed by the idea that Jinwoo needed no time at all to get used to the radical changes of that chaotic world. He breaks into a huge smile, predicting that the boy has the talent to become an elite hunter simply by demonstrating such coldness and determination in such a hostile environment. The scene changes to the luxurious interior of the practical skills testing area. Jinwoo steps onto the polished floor, impressed by the size of the hall, which looks more like a 5-star hotel than a military base. With Ramba hidden nearby, he walks through the lobby, muttering that he expected to see a lot of people but not a crowd this massive. He gets lost in the midst of so many candidates chatting animatedly and wonders if they all came for the rookie player training. On the other side of the room, some people comment on how difficult it is to get through so many competitors just to be considered a player. Leaning back in a chair in the back, our protagonist rests, relaxed, and states that all this bureaucracy will be easy. After all, he's the one who understands summoners battle better than anyone in the world. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoes through the auditorium, immediately silencing the side conversations. The boy smirks, seeing that everyone has gathered and that things are finally about to get moving. But his smile vanishes, and his eyes widen as he recognizes the big man stepping onto the stage. The bearded man adjusts the microphone and introduces himself to the audience as Park Chang-seok, the examiner from the association, announcing that he will begin the written test. A short time later, the man calls Jinwoo for a private conversation in a sunny office, asking if he was surprised to see him again so soon. The young man admits his surprise, sitting in the chair, and says he really didn't expect to see him as an evaluator, and the judge jokes that it must be fate. Changing the focus, the examiner pulls out the boy's answer sheet, showing the flawless written test full of correct answers about summons. He praises the accuracy, stating that the young man's level of knowledge about creature combinations is exceptional. Ramba, who is hidden floating near the window, hears the praise and mutters a proud "what" for her boss. Internally, our protagonist is annoyed because the examiner used the same classic combination he created in the original game, finding it absurd that they don't even ask for copyright permission. But on the outside, he just hides it with a nervous laugh and thanks him for the compliment. Park Chang-seok clears his throat, getting his attention, and says he called him there privately precisely because of the rewards form he promised earlier. Adjusting his posture, the man rests his hands and asks if Jinwoo happened to be what the system usually classifies as a gamer. He fixes his eyes on the boy, trying to confirm his suspicions that all that knowledge couldn't be natural for an amateur. Jinwoo repeats the word confused, as the screen displays an explanation on the subject, informing that gamers are the old mobile players from whom 70% of Korea's great hunters originated. At least most of the great talents of this new era had previous contact with the Summoner's Battle app before the towers appeared. Our protagonist thinks quickly and realizes that admitting he played the game would be the perfect excuse to justify how he knew about the enemy's buffs in the hall, without raising suspicions of cheating. He nods his head and agrees with the examiner, saying that yes, he did play a bit of the game back in the day, and the bearded man smiles, saying he already suspected it, and asks how long he had been playing. With a drop of sweat running down his face, the boy thinks to himself that if he confesses to playing a failed game with 3 active players for over 10 years, it would be very easy for them to discover his true identity. So he decides to lie to protect himself and answers hesitantly that he played for just 1 year. The examiner jumps to his feet and slams his hands on the table, completely shocked by the information, making the boy jump in surprise. Leaning back in his chair, Jinwoo asks, startled, if there's a problem with his answer, wondering if he shortened the time too much in his lie. The judge is amazed at the idea that the boy managed to play that dead game for a whole year without getting bored, stating that not even the top Korean rankers lasted that long back in the day. Our protagonist hides his nervousness with a sheepish smile, just nodding that yes, that's how things turned out, and the examiner sits back down, impressed. Resuming his professional demeanor, Park Chang-seok apologizes for the outburst and says he has prepared 2 types of rewards, and the boy agrees to hear the options. Raising one finger, the bearded man explains that the first reward is to use his personal authority to register the boy as a player immediately, skipping the bureaucracy. He extends his arms excitedly and completes the offer by saying he can also guarantee a job position in the official association with a wonderful free pass. Jinwoo rests his face in his hand, listening to the proposal with the utmost disinterest, and the examiner raises 2 fingers to reveal the second option. Park Chang-seok clasps his hands, revealing that the second choice is to simply receive the sum of 5 million won in cash. The man smiles slyly, asking what the boy thought of the offer, imagining that any normal person would choose the quick registration with the free pass, which is more coveted than positions in major companies. He is shocked in the same instant when Jinwoo cuts off his excitement and responds dryly that he'd rather take the money and apologizes. The boy gets up, pushing the chair back, and argues that player registration shouldn't take that long to process naturally, thanking him for his concern. Walking to the door, our protagonist explains that he has no interest in working for a corporation, and that since he's already focused on hunting summons, he can't waste time punching a clock. Outside the base, the player zone glows as hunters gather in front of the gate of an official dungeon under the supervision of the guilds. An employee with a clipboard in hand calls for candidate Baek Jinwoo, and he answers present, walking confidently towards the arena accompanied by his gorilla. She explains that the practical exam for that day consists of clearing a Tuesday dungeon in a time attack style, and that he must be as fast as possible to secure his grade. The boy nods in agreement and listens to the instructor wish him good luck before he enters through the blue portal, closely watched by the curious gazes of the other candidates. Watching the boy's entrance, Park Chang-seok comments with a proud smile that he really didn't expect the kid to refuse the association's free pass. With dark eyes and an extremely serious expression, the examiner reflects that this level of arrogance must be backed by formidable skill. The scene changes to a woman throwing the boy's test on the table in shock, yelling that this level of knowledge about runes is insane and affirming that Jinwoo understands the system much better than any expert she has ever seen. Trembling with excitement and nervousness, the short-haired teacher cries with joy upon realizing the magnitude of the talent she has just discovered, lamenting her own limited perspective while praising the perfectly crafted answers on those sheets. Watching the commotion from afar, the examiner smirks, imagining that if that boy confirms his expectations, it won't be impossible for him to enter the world rankings in the near future, wondering in shock if he really found someone of that level. He strokes his beard, worried, thinking that perhaps the refusal of the first proposal was because the initial offer wasn't good enough for someone of the young man's caliber, wondering if he should have offered more luxurious conditions. Back at the practical test, the system announces that the explanations are over and authorizes Jinwoo to begin the challenge, starting his first major time attack as an official hunter. Stopping in front of the magic portal, Jinwoo picks up his pace, focused, and tells himself that now is the time to show what he's capable of. He asks the system if he can start the attempt and awaits confirmation that the time attack has officially begun. As soon as authorization is given, the boy crosses through the portal, accompanied by the gorilla, and the two begin to descend, glowing in the lights of the dimensional rift. The information system displays that the current room is infested with highly toxic slimes, and instructs the player to defeat the creatures as quickly as possible to escape. Ramba appears flying and Jinwoo points forward, ordering the fairy to start applying buffs immediately, and she agrees excitedly, beginning to cast her support magic. Buffed by the magic, Tialgo beats its chest and lets out a deafening roar as several status increase icons appear around the ape, filling the room with energy. Walking just behind, our protagonist remembers that the Tuesday dungeon has a maze-like structure, and that he needs to defeat the slimes to clear a path until he finally finds the area's boss. Recalling his gaming days, Jinwoo comments that this place was always famous for making beginners waste all their time attack time, just walking in circles and running out the clock. But with a sly smile and sharp eyes, he points out that things will be very different this time. He runs ahead, telling his partner that the slimes are slow enemies, and they can simply ignore them and go straight through the maze, arrogantly stating that he has been through that path so many times that finding the right exit is no challenge. Jinwoo points to a dark corridor at the back of the room and shouts to the gorilla that the correct exit is right there. Leaping over a gooey slime, the boy explains that if they take that shortcut, they will reach the final area immediately, without having to face the monsters along the way. The system flashes a scarlet-red alert, confirming the appearance of the boss monster, leaving our protagonist eager for the battle. With a confident smile on his face, he tells his partner that this is the first time they will face the boss in person. A colossal giant slime with a crown on its head appears in the center of the room, facing the invading duo. Jinwoo's smile widens even more as he says aloud that he's finally meeting the great slime face to face. The gelatinous monster begins to tremble its purple body, preparing to launch its corrosive attack towards the group. Without retreating a single step, Jinwoo yells, ordering Tialgo to use all its strength in that blow, as the ape charges forward covered in the emerald aura, roaring furiously. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ramba approaches the slime, further strengthening the gorilla's punches, which land like meteors on the gooey creature, making it tremble under the impact. The energy of the punch is so absurd that Tialgo's fists generate a shockwave that sweeps through the room, raising dust and destroying part of the monster. Watching the destruction, Jinwoo smiles with conviction and thinks that Ramba is considered an absurdly broken unit for a very good reason. Walking calmly, he observes that her magic is capable of turning even a basic F-rank summon into a true killing machine with surreal attack speed. Laughing to himself, the boy says that if this already makes the gorilla destroy bosses in seconds, imagine how insane the effect of Ramba buffing higher-level summons would be. The notification system finally lights up on the screen, confirming that the boss monster has been defeated, but the listed time makes our protagonist's eyes widen in surprise. The status window shows that the dungeon was completed in 5 minutes and 32 seconds, and Jinwoo scratches the back of his neck, frustrated, thinking it was too slow because back in the game, he could clear everything in under a minute. But right after, a new window pops up, flashing in gold, congratulating the player for breaking the South Korean time attack record, leaving the boy completely baffled by what he just read. Confused, he reads the special prizes for unlocking this achievement, receiving summoning scrolls and abrasives, and stammers in perplexity, wondering if that pathetic time was really the country's best record. Outside the arena, an employee points at the monitor, shouting for the supervisor to look at the screen because the time record was just updated out of nowhere. The boss rushes to the desk and asks where it happened, his eyes widening as he reads the report indicating 5 minutes and 32 seconds in the low-ranked dungeon. A gray-haired supervisor is stunned, arguing that such a massive time cut in the maze dungeon is absurd and wonders if the famous player Kang Jin-ho invented some new combination of units, or if it was something else that caused it. Upon opening the new record holder's file, the screen displays the face and data of Baek Jinwoo, revealing that he is the current owner of the country's best time. The supervisor and the boss look at each other in shock, with the woman commenting that his face doesn't look like that of a top-tier player and that she had never heard that name before in the association. The man swallows hard, processing the information that an amateur with no prior registration managed to beat the country's #1 ranks time in a single time attack. The information spreads quickly, and in no time the executives of the Player Central gather in a silent meeting room, analyzing Baek Jinwoo's photo projected on a giant screen. An employee with glasses reports amazed that Mr. Jinwoo is truly incredible, while the woman from before just stares at the documents, stunned, trying to process the insane speed of that rookie. Park Chang-seok, who is also in the meeting, gives a sly smile, stroking his beard. Beaming, the examiner slams the table, affirming that the boy is undeniably a rare gem, and exclaims with enthusiasm that he is a national treasure that must be protected. With a stern expression, the man orders that the association must secure Jinwoo's affiliation no matter the cost, arguing that at the very least, they need to prevent the boy from becoming a citizen of another country if Korea is to survive the current crisis. One of the directors proposes registering him as a player immediately, skipping the remaining bureaucracy, and the boss's eyes widen, asking if they are going to do that without even requiring the official match against another player. Park Chang-seok responds calmly that everyone there knows that time attacks are divided into global and national categories, reminding them that Kang Jin-ho was first in Korea with a time of 6 minutes and 41 seconds. The screen focuses on Jinwoo's shadowy back as the counselor's voice explains that even with that impressive time, the country doesn't even appear in the world ranking, which is led by a player with an absurd time of 2 minutes and 25 seconds. He emphasizes that Jinwoo not only broke the Korean record, but also surpassed it by a ridiculous margin, making the blonde player's face appear prominently among the global relics of record holders. The examiner turns his back and speaks seriously, saying that a talent of this level deserves special treatment and questions if a basic match test against another hunter would have any meaning for someone who has already proven to be so monstrous in dungeons. In front of the imposing Player Central building, the sun begins to set, painting the sky orange as our protagonist lets out a long sigh, leaving the complex. Jinwoo mutters in disbelief that he never imagined a mere 5 minutes would be enough to set a record, grumbling if that mediocre level is the true state of South Korea today. Distracted, Jinwoo is startled when he hears his name shouted loudly in the middle of the street outside the headquarters. He turns around and sees Park Chang-seok running towards him, sweaty and waving his arms like a madman, yelling that he's been looking for him for a while. Catching up, the breathless man says he saw the time attack result, stating that breaking the South Korean record on the first try is simply impressive. Trying not to seem arrogant, Jinwoo gives a sheepish smile and replies that it was no big deal, finding it a bit strange to be praised for a task as simple as swimming would be for a fish, considering his vast experience in the game. The examiner agrees excitedly, saying that the Tuesday dungeon is very complex because of the maze, and extends his hand, handing a brand new card to the boy, asking him to take it. Jinwoo takes the plastic object, confused, and examines the surface, discovering that the man has just given him an official player license. The counselor gives a thumbs up and a wink, explaining that Jinwoo was specially and immediately registered because he has already proven he has more than enough skill to earn the title, and our protagonist thinks that this turned out to be a great result, saving him time. But Park Chang-seok's expression changes, and he swallows hard before respectfully asking if he could reveal the secret of how he managed to break the record like that. The setting sun hits Jinwoo's face as he understands the true intention behind the counselor's kindness. Staring at the silver license, the boy realizes that revealing his strategy now would have major consequences for his own life, considering the risks of the real world. If he shared his exploration secrets, South Korea's level would explode instantly, forcing the global rankings to notice the country once again. However, he reflects that the problems would come right after the recognition because, in the best-case scenario, he would be showered with attention, gaining money, honor, and national sponsorship, serving as the government's poster boy. But our protagonist narrows his eyes, remembering that in the worst-case scenario, reality tends to be darker, knowing he could be kidnapped, tortured by gangs, or forced to have every drop of information squeezed out of him painfully until he's no longer useful. He slowly lowers the card, letting out a heavy sigh, and states dryly that this question is quite nosy and inappropriate for the situation. Jinwoo gives the examiner a sidelong glance and firmly asks if the man is at least aware that what he just asked is extremely disrespectful in a world where information is as valuable as one's life. Park Chang-seok looks down and bows slightly, apologizing for the invasive approach, immediately recognizing his mistake. Clenching his fists tightly, the boy declares that a gamer's strategy is a very delicate matter and should only be shared with completely trusted allies. The bearded man pleads for the young man to understand his side, revealing with a tense look that South Korea is at rock bottom and desperate to find genuine talent. Analyzing the sincerity in the man's voice, Jinwoo reflects that he at least doesn't seem to be a bad or malicious person, just very anxious to help his country. Walking through the streets, Jinwoo thinks that the counselor was quick to deposit the promised money earlier and has a decent personality, indicating that it might be possible to do business with the association after all. Smiling to himself, our protagonist considers the possibility of using his own country's resources to his advantage, reasoning that if he plays his cards right, he can grow much faster using the government's infrastructure than by fighting alone in the shadows. Having made his decision, he agrees to talk seriously, addressing the man by his title of counselor in a firm voice, and the examiner promptly responds to the boy's attention. Our protagonist suggests they move to a different location to talk in peace, away from the hustle and bustle of the player's central. Already inside a fancy coffee shop, the sunlight illuminates the table where the two sit face to face to begin their negotiation. The counselor repeats his plea, earnestly asking the boy to help the association, confessing that the headquarters really needs his knowledge to avoid ruin, and Jinwoo listens quietly, holding his cup. Jinwoo states that he will be very direct in their conversation and looks the man in the eyes, asking how he deduced the coma situation so quickly, confirming if the bearded man investigated his past. Park Chang-seok lowers his head in shame and apologizes, explaining that an unregistered player with his skill drew attention, and the association feared he might be a spy or a disguised gang member. Slamming his cup on the table with force, Jinwoo reprimands the action without raising his voice and demands in a threatening tone that they not gossip about his life behind his back again if they don't want trouble, and the man breaks into a cold sweat, quickly agreeing. The counselor swallows hard, surprised by the attitude, as normally when the government asks for cooperation, appealing to the good of the nation, people get intimidated or are willing to help blindly. But watching the boy drink his coffee calmly without showing a hint of intimidation, he realizes that the young man knows exactly the value of the information he possesses and knows very well how to use it to his advantage in this high-stakes negotiation. Jinwoo raises his steaming cup of coffee, mentally evaluating all the variables, stating that he has thought a lot about the matter and directly asks the examiner what he would get in return if he decided to help the country. Park Chang-seok repeats the word in a confused tone, as if he didn't understand the question, finding it strange that the boy is talking about cooperation when he had offered favors before. With his cheeks slightly flushed, the counselor scratches the back of his neck and admits that he's a bit embarrassed to say it out loud, but reveals that he holds a very high and influential position in the South Korean Hunters Association. A comical illustration appears, showing the examiner on a podium as he proudly explains that the player's central is run by counselors elected by popular vote, which means that if he brings good results to the country, he can garner more votes and climb even higher in his political career. Jinwoo taps his fingers, listening to the confession and letting out a mocking sigh, realizing that the man was basically a politician desperate for public approval. The bearded man resumes his serious posture and guarantees that he will provide all possible support and resources within the scope of his authority if the boy agrees to share his valuable strategies with the association. Stroking his chin, our protagonist thinks the offer is quite disappointing and weak, as the rewards are very vague, and the fact that he's a public official means the man can't just freely divert funds the way the boy needs. Tapping his finger on the table, Jinwoo makes a quick decision and says that under these conditions, he has a different proposal to put on the table. He looks the counselor in the eyes and asks for a period of just 1 month, leaving Park Chang-seok speechless, not understanding the sudden request. Smiling confidently, the boy explains that since he has just registered as an official hunter, he will focus purely on leveling up during this first month, requesting support from the association only when strictly necessary. With a cold expression, Jinwoo concludes by saying that if he is satisfied with the treatment he receives, he will continue to collaborate, and if he doesn't like it, he will simply return everything he received or provide information of equivalent value before cutting ties for good. The examiner breaks into a cold sweat as he processes the boy's words, realizing in shock that this kid was basically hiring him to work as his private secretary for a whole month, for free. Despite the absurdity of the situation, the bearded man extends his hand in a tacit agreement, admitting that the young man's audacity is surprising, but he has no other choice but to accept the terms if he wants to save the country. The counselor formally shakes Jinwoo's hand, agreeing to the pact and declaring that in the end, he will certainly have much more to gain by sticking with this extraordinary talent than by rejecting him out of pride. Withdrawing his hand, our protagonist points at the man and warns that before anything else, there is something very important he needs to clarify. The boy adopts a dark expression and orders the association to ensure that the fact he broke the national record that afternoon is not disclosed to the media or the public under any circumstances. Park Chang-seok finds the request strange and asks for the reason, since it would bring a lot of fame and money, and Jinwoo responds seriously that he's doing it because he's very concerned about his own safety. The examiner is offended by the insinuation and raises his voice, stating that the association is perfectly capable of protecting its talents, guaranteeing his safety without any problems. The boy shakes his head, denying the statement, and retorts coldly that he doesn't trust a player central that can't even handle an attack from a common little gang without putting civilians' lives at risk. Clenching his fist on the table, the man listens silently, knowing he can't refute the boy's argument after the embarrassment from earlier, and ends up agreeing, saying he will try to block the information as much as he can. But he warns that rumors will inevitably leak out little by little in the underworld, as many people witness the record being broken, and Jinwoo nods, saying that just delaying the news is good enough. Ending the conversation, the boy gets up from the table and says he's leaving, thanking him for the coffee, while the examiner says goodbye, asking to meet again soon. Walking down the busy street with his phone in hand, our protagonist lets out a sigh of relief for having managed to dominate the negotiation, thinking that now the association will do everything to keep their mouths shut. With a cunning smile on his face, he turns on his phone screen, murmuring to himself if he should finally take a look at the rewards the system gave him for breaking the national record earlier. As soon as the screen glows with his inventory, Jinwoo's eyes widen, impressed, letting out a low whistle at the number of items that appeared in the holographic window. He counts the prizes received, and is amazed to see that he won no less than 3 high-class summoning scrolls and 2 low-level abrasives, concluding that the system is completely insane. Trying to stay calm, he analyzes the screen, commenting that these valuable rewards really do justice to the weight of a first-time achievement, confirming that the system is very generous with record-breaking. Jinwoo leans against the wall, reflecting, and murmurs that he really wants to open the scrolls right now, but that it would be a very risky bet to try his luck with only 3 units available. Running a hand through his hair, he realizes it would be much smarter and safer to sell those high-class scrolls on the black market and make a river of money in the process. He opens the player web app, an exclusive portal that only officially registered players from the association can access, ensuring the market is focused and secure, and where almost all legal item transactions in the country take place. Jinwoo remembers the counselor's words as he slides the screen, laughing to himself and commenting that the man recommended that platform for trading and compensations very well, finding the service quite practical. With his eyes fixed on the screen, he decides to look up the market price list, clicking on the Commercial Ads tab to see the value of the items in his inventory. Standing with his back to the street, the boy lets out a confused groan upon reading the value flashing on the screen, thinking he must have misread it. His face is covered in shadows, his eyes wide in absolute shock after confirming the absurd numbers listed there. Jinwoo scrolls the page, his hands trembling, murmuring with a faltering voice, asking himself if the money he would earn would really be 33 million won. Clutching his head, stunned, the boy concludes, perplexed, that he just made 33 million in just 5 minutes of exploration, calling the whole situation insane and surreal. The young man's face turns red with embarrassment and shock, imagining the accumulated wealth he would have if he kept doing this several times, and how that money would change his life overnight. A fantastical vision appears in his mind, where he hugs his mother, father, and little sister, crying in the middle of a mountain of money, swearing that he will let his family live without worrying about bills ever again. Coming back to his senses, Jinwoo coughs, hiding his internal freakout, and rationalizes that the best plan is to sell the high-class scrolls first and use the money to buy low-class ones, taking advantage of the fact that his old summons are powerful enough to surpass even B-rank partners. He continues browsing the app, looking for the prices of low-class scrolls, but suddenly his finger freezes on the screen, a surprised expression on his face. The boy discovers that the weakest scrolls cost 5,000 won each, which is an absurdly high price for the most disposable item in the game, as he remembers they used to pile up in dungeons like useless junk. Scratching his cheek, he finds the situation very strange, noticing that the market is flooded with sellers and very few buyers, but the prices don't drop at all. Without a second thought, he calls Ah-jin, wanting to clear up his doubt. The girl answers the phone sitting on her bed in her pajamas and asks what her older brother wants at this hour, and he replies, asking for a minute of her time to clear up a question about the market. An illustration of Ah-jin appears with a small sign explaining the game's economy to our protagonist. The girl laughs and replies that the price of low-rank scrolls is fixed at 5,000 won simply because the association buys up all the surplus at once, clearing the market. Jinwoo walks through the night street, frowning, and asks why the government would spend money buying up a bunch of useless scrolls. His sister lies down comfortably in bed and says that no one knows for sure, but they buy them in bulk using tax money under the official pretext of providing support and resources for high-ranking players to explore the rifts. She raises a finger and explains that because of this guaranteed purchase, rookie hunters don't bother lowering their prices in negotiations, since they can just sell directly to the association without needing to find a buyer, but she's heard rumors that this policy will be abolished soon because the money is running out. The boy stops walking suddenly, looking at the horizon with wide eyes, and lets out a shocked, "What?" understanding the magnitude of the opportunity that has just appeared before him. Smiling slyly, he thinks that the government does this because low-rank scrolls are completely useless in the harder stages and must be collecting dust in the association's warehouses, serving no purpose until now. Holding the phone in front of his face, illuminated by the screen, Jinwoo murmurs with satisfaction that if this is really how things are, he knows exactly what to do to take advantage of the situation. The scene cuts to the next morning, showing examiner Park Chang-seok in a sunlit office, opening his arms and welcoming Jinwoo with an excited smile. The bearded man laughs boisterously, joking that the boy must have missed him to come visit so early the next day, and our protagonist nods awkwardly, saying that's just how things turned out. The examiner rests his hands on the table and asks in a helpful tone if Jinwoo needs any favors, or if a problem has come up for him to appear so suddenly, and the boy replies with a hesitant. With a serious face, Jinwoo says he came to see if the association could provide him with some low-rank summoning scrolls to use, and the man's eyes widen, asking back if he meant the weak scrolls and not the intermediate or advanced rank ones. Surprised by the humility of the request, the counselor asks how many exactly the boy needs, and Jinwoo replies directly, asking for as many scrolls as he can get. Park Chang-seok frowns, stroking his beard, and says there's no problem in providing the goods. After all, more than 50,000 units of these useless scrolls arrive at the association every day. But the counselor changes his tone and warns the boy that if his plan is to resell these items on the black market to make easy money, he won't release the scrolls, and Jinwoo immediately denies it, saying he only wants the material because he plans to use it personally in dungeons. The examiner gives the young man a sidelong glance, analyzing his posture, realizing that the kid has some dark plan in mind hidden behind that innocent face. Park Chang-seok watches Jinwoo silently, thinking about how different he is from all the other gamers he has ever met and speculating if the boy plans to do something dangerous with that pile of junk scrolls. He raises his hand, gesturing, and agrees to release the items, but warns in a serious tone that there is a non-negotiable condition for the transaction to happen. The boy blinks, confused, asking what the condition is, and the bearded man leans forward, demanding that he give at least one small piece of useful information about the game in exchange for the scrolls. The man with his arms crossed warns that despite his position of authority, he is elected by popular vote, and if he gets caught distributing items bought with taxpayers' money for free, he would lose the people's trust in an instant, and Jinwoo listens quietly, nodding that he understands the situation. The counselor takes a sip of coffee, justifying his stance by saying he needs at least one or two guarantees to protect himself politically before signing off on the release of the goods, and the boy agrees, saying that's fair. Jinwoo gives a crooked, dark smile, running a hand through his hair, and thinks that the guy isn't as dumb as he looks, and that he won't just hand over the resources for free as he had hoped. He settles into the armchair, confirming the exchange, and agrees, saying he prefers things this way because it means the government will treat him with due respect if he provides valuable information, ensuring the partnership will be balanced. With a finger raised, the boy says that, first of all, the government needs to focus on hidden time-based rewards, explaining that there's a trick called second discount achievements, and the examiner raises an eyebrow, curious about the term. Jinwoo explains the strategy, and the scene shows him and the counselor in miniature form, celebrating with a bunch of creatures, that upon clearing a dungeon, the player gets first clear prizes, as in his case, where he got 3 advanced scrolls for finishing the dungeon in just over 5 minutes. However, he reveals the catch, saying that this same special reward can be obtained over and over again if another player manages to beat the record again right after, which makes Park Chang-seok's jaw drop in amazement. He details the diabolical plan, and the caricatures show players passing the baton, saying that if a group organizes and keeps beating the time in turns, lowering the record little by little, second by second, each of them will get the maximum reward, generating an infinite fortune. An image of money raining down appears on the screen as Jinwoo says this would create an army of well-armed players with advanced scrolls, and South Korea's national power would skyrocket overnight. The counselor taps his chin with a pen and sighs heavily, confessing that this is a dirty tactic the association has tried to use in the past, but the high-ranking hunters have already received their individual rewards, so no one tries to improve the records anymore. Jinwoo shrugs, laughing, and says there's no problem with that. After all, there are still thousands of low-rank players out there who have never come close to breaking a record and therefore haven't received the rewards, which makes them perfect candidates for the time relay tactic. Park Chang-seok's eyes widen as he understands the idea, while our protagonist delivers the final checkmate, announcing that the second piece of information he will share will be the absolute and definitive strategy for getting through the complex Tuesday dungeon the easiest and safest way possible. The counselor claps excitedly, confirming that his suspicions about the boy were completely correct. The man celebrates, thinking the young man used the 3-minute mark method, but our protagonist thinks to himself that he actually just copied the technique the 5 emperors used in the past. With an excited smile, the bearded man affirms that anyone using that system could clear the dungeon quickly. Before the counselor can continue, Jinwoo raises his hand, asking him to take it easy. Maintaining his posture, the boy warns that they need to make the price of that information very clear, charging 150 million in addition to the agreed-upon scrolls. Completely shocked by the amount, Park Chang-seok jumps in his chair while the young man calmly argues that this price is a bargain. Sitting relaxedly, our protagonist explains that this method can be used even in the highest-level rifts, justifying that the profits will easily surpass the billion-won mark. After analyzing the situation, the man lowers his head, letting out a heavy sigh, and ends up agreeing to the terms. With the deal sealed, he promises to transfer the money immediately if the information proves to be true. To seal the deal, the counselor guarantees the daily supply of 10,000 low-rank scrolls, assuring the boy that he won't regret this partnership. Later, at the end of the day, the sun sets over the players' central, where the staff announces that everyone has gathered. An entire team waits in the illuminated courtyard, while one of the employees questions the reason for such a sudden meeting. The examiner adjusts his tie and reveals that he called the group there because he needs to test something new. Given the mysterious atmosphere, one of the young men deduces that it definitely must not be a common experiment. The employee adds to the reasoning, commenting that he heard about the recent breaking of the Tuesday dungeon record. The counselor makes up an excuse, saying he got a great strategy from an outside source and that the results were excellent when he secretly tested it with Hunter Beak Jinwoo. Believing the lie, the employee asks if that's really true and understands why the boss told them not to spread the news before. With a confident smile, the bearded man simply agrees with his subordinate's deduction. Full of excitement, the man declares that from that moment on, they will completely dominate and crush the Tuesday dungeon. Revealing the big secret, he points out that the key to clearing that maze is to simply use the painted Komodo dragon summon. The entire team is confused, looking at the reptile, not understanding how a creature like that could be the solution. This B-rank monster is the size of an adult man and has reasonable strength, being theoretically versatile for both attack and defense. The system screen displays the beast's data, showing its basic characteristics that everyone already knew. But the brown-haired employee sighs, disappointed, remembering that in practice, this summon is very difficult to evolve and ends up being a terrible choice compared to other monsters of the same level. What the players of that time had no idea about was the reptile's true utility when placed in the right environment. The hidden fact was that the painted Komodo's favorite food was precisely the giant slimes, allowing it to devour the maze's monsters, clearing a path in the blink of an eye. The sun rises over the city as notifications of new records begin to pop up non-stop. The team celebrates wildly upon seeing the time drop to 5 minutes and 29 seconds, shocked at having reached the boss room so quickly. Park Chang-seok holds up the reptile like a trophy, shouting that the creature is a true money-making machine, and that now they no longer have to worry about the regulatory agents. A few days later, the scene cuts to the interior of an office, illuminated by the morning light. The local news is headlining that the records for the Tuesday Rift are being repeatedly broken in Korea. Seeing the articles praising his ability to get valuable information at a low cost, the counselor lets out a weary sigh. Resting his face in his hands, he stares at the computer screen, concluding that our protagonist is certainly much more valuable than a simple first-year player. Impressed with the results, the man decides to focus entirely on the young man and create a team dedicated exclusively to Jinwoo. With a few employee files in hand, he carefully analyzes the options, murmuring about who the ideal members would be. After reviewing the files, the bearded man separates 3 specific resumes, stating that those people would be up to the task. The documents reveal the profiles of the agents selected to monitor and assist the new national talent. Far away under the daylight, Jinwoo's phone pings, showing an absurd balance of 167 million won, making him let out an exclamation of pure surprise. With the device in his trembling hands, the boy is shocked by how easy it is to make money, praising the counselor's generosity as he calculates how many cream-filled buns he could buy with this fortune. As he swipes the blue holographic screen, he comments that besides all this cash, there's an even more important detail. The system displays his packed inventory, confirming the exact receipt of the 10,000 low-rank scrolls promised by the association that morning. A dark and calculating smile spreads across our protagonist's face as he decides to do his part of the deal, since the government kept its promise perfectly. To set the mood, the boy opens a bottle of mineral water, ready to begin the summoning ritual. Turning his head, he asks if Rambo is ready for the marathon, and the fairy responds with a super excited shout. Pouring the water on the floor as if it were a mystical offering, the young man begins to call upon all the gods and spirits of the universe, begging for luck. Jinwoo clasps his hands in comical desperation, pleading with the heavens for his divine alter ego to grant him a quality beast. After the quick prayer, the boy holds the glowing scroll and says that now is the moment of truth. Without wasting time, he tears open a huge pack of red items, shouting that this is the beginning of his infinite grind. However, some time later, our protagonist is left lying on the floor, completely exhausted and surrounded by a mountain of weak and useless creatures. Panting and indignant, he complains that he tore through more than 3,000 scrolls in just 1 hour, and questions how it's possible that not a single decent unit has come out after so much effort. Soon it dawns on him and the boy scratches his head, admitting that unfortunately things aren't that easy. Ramba floats by and asks rhetorically if her master really thought he would pull an exiled unit so easily just because he managed to summon her on the first try. Getting up from the floor, Jinwoo extends his hand, frustrated, and replies that pulling the fairy first was just incredibly absurd luck. The young man explains that to rescue those specific partners, even 100,000 scrolls might not be enough, let alone the 10,000 he has now. Hearing his lament, the little fairy laughs in his face, asking in a provocative tone if the famous and legendary player really knows nothing about how the summoning system works. The logic of the world dictates that the number of summoned beasts is equivalent to 10% of the human population, which means that for 8 billion people, there are 800 million available monsters. Jinwoo points his finger, agreeing, and completes the reasoning by stating that the real problem is that the overwhelming majority of those 800 million is composed of that junk horned caterpillar he just pulled. To contradict this logic, Ramba raises a finger and explains that since the banned units are in a state of quarantine, there is only a single individual copy of each of them. The boy is completely startled, asking the reason for this exclusivity, and the fairy shrugs, confessing that she has no idea either. Processing the information, our protagonist looks into the distance and concludes that the only absolute certainty is that he is the only human capable of pulling these special units, realizing that the chance is still minuscule since there are thousands of types of monsters out there. Breaking into a cold sweat, the boy grumbles that this probability is practically zero, as he needs to fish for the single existing unit in an ocean of repeated monsters. Crouched on the floor in complete despair, Jinwoo laments his own luck, stating that it would be much easier to win the lottery twice in a row. In an attempt to cheer up her master, Ramba affectionately hugs his leg and tells him not to worry, reminding him that once monsters are out of the gacha pool, they don't return to the system until they are sold. The fairy explains the mechanic, detailing that if he summons all 800 million horned caterpillars, they will simply stop appearing in the next scrolls, filtering the options. Patting his partner on the head, our protagonist agrees with the theory, but points out that the process is still a nightmare to get through. With an analytical look, the young man ponders for a second if it wouldn't be better to start using medium-rank scrolls right away. He dismisses the idea himself in the same moment, concluding that the efficiency would be terrible because those items are very expensive and rare on the market. Accepting his fate, the boy clenches his fists, aware that the probability is absurdly low but that there is no other way. Tearing another scroll with all his might, Jinwoo states that he has no choice but to keep trying until he succeeds. His agonized scream echoes through the illuminated city as he begs for the units to come out soon, with the fairy cheering excitedly in the background. The sun is already setting, painting the sky orange over the facility rented by the boy. Lying in bed, completely destroyed with exhaustion, our protagonist murmurs that he's going to keel over and asks for a cream-filled bun in a faint voice. For the last 2 weeks, his routine has been a true inferno, tearing through an incredible 140,000 scrolls in a marathon that almost drove him mad. With heavy eyes and deep dark circles, he stares at the ceiling, trying to gather the strength to continue his journey. Jinwoo chews on a cream-filled bun in the room he rented near the player zone to facilitate the synthesis of his summons, reflecting that he needs to achieve his independence because he can't live in debt to his parents forever. Jinwoo gets up from the bed, sighing, and decides that the time has come to act. Ramba throws herself onto the starry sheets, asking if they are going to do synthesis that day too, and takes the opportunity to clamor for more cream-filled buns. The imposing synthesis center building, which once functioned as a luxury hotel, stands out under the orange light of dusk. Our protagonist observes the modern lobby and reflects that just as Jamsil Tower became a challenge zone, other buildings have also undergone radical changes. With his hands in his pockets, he looks at the hunters chatting in the lobby and recalls that the buffet in that place used to be very famous. The young man walks to the electronic terminal, located near the wall, to request his place in the service line. A small printed paper slides out of the machine and the boy takes it, noting that he got number 125. While her master drinks a cup of coffee, the little fairy flies around desperately, demanding that he not make any mistakes in the process, and the boy calmly agrees. The luminous panel on the door beeps, indicating their turn, and Jinwoo tells his partner that it's finally time to go in. The reserved room has an advanced technological design, with a large glowing magic circle on the floor ready for use. Our protagonist kindly asks Ramba to take good care of him once more, and the little creature clenches her fists, shouting excitedly for them to start. Focused on the objective, the young man operates the floating holographic interface with quick and precise movements. The system emits a luminous alert, confirming that the Wind Fairy has been successfully registered in the center of the circle of light. A blue window appears, asking if the player wishes to proceed with the synthesis, and Jinwoo presses the confirmation button on the spot. Countless lower-level summons are sacrificed and disappear into the air, feeding the fairy's intense glow, while the boy laughs a little awkwardly at the massive number of monsters used. The bright screen displays a prominent notification, confirming that the synthesis process was completed successfully. Surrounded by particles of light, Ramba emerges renewed as the system announces that the Wind Fairy's level has risen to 21, in addition to gaining 2 intelligence points. The boy claps with a forced smile, reflecting in shock that she only reached that level even after he ground through 140,000 summons. The little fairy strikes a pose, showing off her little arms, and asks if she looks stronger, earning praise from her master, who internally despairs, remembering that the maximum level is 100 and the road will be long. A few days pass peacefully, and the enormous mirrored building of the player's headquarters rises under a clean blue sky. In the office, the counselor types quickly on his keyboard, humming a song in an extremely cheerful mood. The big guy asks his assistant if work isn't flowing perfectly today, and the young man agrees nervously, wondering about the reason for all this sudden joy. Park Chang-seok adjusts himself in his chair, revealing that now that he has assembled a talent management team, he intends to pour all his efforts and resources into supporting Baek Jinwoo during his political term. Curious about the progress, the boss asks his assistant, Byung-jin, what the Prodigy boy is doing at the moment, and the employee hesitates before speaking. The young man in the brown suit says that Jinwoo just keeps opening scrolls non-stop and that he took even more boxes today, catching the examiner by surprise. The assistant adds a crucial piece of information, saying that the kid wants to use the 150 million he earned to buy an even larger stock of low-rank summons, leaving the boss speechless. Byung-jin explains that the boy requested a special discount below the listed price, warning that the board is already keeping an eye on them because of these constant material withdrawals. The bearded man analyzes the situation, perplexed by the fact that the young man is pouring his entire fortune back into buying junk that no one else on the market wants. The counselor grips a document tightly, absolutely certain that Jinwoo has a brilliant plan in mind, and tells his subordinate to sell the items for half the price. The assistant's eyes widen, and he screams in despair at the idea of a 50% discount, warning that giving such a blatant privilege will cause a huge headache if they get caught. The examiner gives a cunning smile and tells the assistant to calm down, justifying that the young talent has everything it takes to become the great savior of the nation in the near future. The man envisions a scene where Jinwoo wears a king's crown under the South Korean flag, drooling at the idea of the public recognition he will receive for having financed the hero in his most difficult moments. The politician's fantasy goes far, imagining the population tossing him into the air in celebration and being certain that his approval ratings will skyrocket. Returning to reality, the big guy slams his heavy hand on the wooden table and tells his subordinate to just follow the plan without question. Park Chang-seok turns his face towards the illuminated window and adopts a more severe posture before finishing his thought. With his index finger pressed against his lips, he decrees that the discount scheme must be a secret kept under lock and key, restricted only to their trusted team. The landscape cuts to an open and quiet plaza, illuminated by the bright light of the midday sun. Jinwoo appears, sitting on a pile of torn paper scraps, tearing scrolls like a machine and monotonously counting that he has already passed the 1,500 item mark. The fairy Ramba cries in despair, complaining that her little arms are numb and asks when this torment will end, getting an empty response from her master, who promises to continue until the end. The rhythmic sound of high heels echoes on the asphalt, indicating that someone is walking elegantly towards the pair on the ground. Our protagonist raises his face, full of dark circles, and lets out a confused mumble upon hearing a female voice greet him out of nowhere. A dark-haired woman in a very well-tailored suit gives a professional smile and formally introduces herself as Agent Yu Jia from the Player Central. The young man dusts off his pants as he stands up, asking the reason for the surprise visit, and the woman explains that she came personally to handle the request for a massive purchase of scrolls. The boy's tired face instantly lights up as he remembers the cheeky discount request he had thrown in the counselor's lap. The agent crosses her arms and reveals that the board held a closed meeting about his case, deciding to carefully evaluate the request because of the valuable contributions the boy has made in recent weeks. The figure of Yu Jia gains an angelic aura in the boy's vision when she reveals that the association will sell them for half the price, making the young man stammer, completely amazed. The agent delicately raises a finger and drops another bombshell, announcing that the department has also deposited an extra scholarship of 100 million won into his account under the justification of management costs. Our protagonist's jaw drops, not believing he just received such a fortune for free, and lets out a surprised shout. The woman whispers with a conspiratorial smile, asking him to keep the deal in total secrecy, and the boy guarantees that his lips are sealed about these things. Yu Jia's gaze sharpens for a second as she warns that all this money is an investment to ensure the young man's loyalty to the association, and Jinwoo winks, affirming that he perfectly understands the rules of the game. The employee gives a slight bow of farewell and says she won't disturb the hunter's busy routine any longer, turning her back to leave. The boy silently watches the woman walk away along the illuminated promenade of the public plaza. Jinwoo grips a scroll in his hand and gives a sly smile upon realizing the counselor's desperation to tie him down, promising to get an exiled unit soon to justify the man's political investment. Time passes, and the orange late afternoon finds our protagonist immersed in a colossal pile of torn papers, maintaining a sickening pace of production. Ramba collapses, exhausted in the middle of the mess, begging to know when the torture will end, and the boy responds fixedly that they will only stop when the explosive dragon mage and the training instructor finally appear. The fairy throws a tantrum, crying that the sound of tearing paper is already causing her a mental breakdown, but her master continues to coldly break the seals, arguing that the sacrifice is inevitable. The system flashes dozens of frustrating messages, confirming the arrival of F-rank junk monsters, fueling our protagonist's anger, who vows to get the exiled unit solely through the force of his accumulated hatred. The young man tears the red item with tremendous force, closing his eyes and desperately pleading for the gacha to be generous this time. A storm of golden and dark lightning suddenly strikes the paper, generating an absurd explosion that pushes the boy back in a huge shock. Jinwoo freezes, and Ramba's eyes widen as they realize that this visual spectacle of wind and lightning is the exact same phenomenon that occurred on the day the special class fairy was brought into the world. The system fires off a glorious notification, confirming the acquisition of the special rank explosive dragon mage, as a beautiful mage with flame-red hair majestically appears, drawing hysterical screams from our protagonist and the fairy. Ramba flies to hug Jinwoo's cheeks, who cries rivers of relieved tears, declaring that all the suffering was worth it and that he could now pass on without regrets. The young man quickly wipes his face, his crying expression changing to one of total seriousness, and tells himself that there's no time to relax now. The boy declares with conviction that they need to keep tearing to take advantage of the so-called drop momentum, leaving the fairy hanging, not understanding what this gamer slang means. Our protagonist quickly extends his hand and grabs another glowing scroll, ready to test his theory of a luck streak. Jinwoo rips the paper with an insane shout, affirming that good things always come in pairs, and the system proves his madness by releasing the coveted X-rank training instructor on the very next try, leaving little Ramba with her jaw on the floor. The master clenches his fist so hard that his veins pop, and he takes a deep breath, savoring the bitter taste of effort that has finally been rewarded. A heavy military boot steps firmly on the promenade, dispelling the magical lights of the second great exiled summon. The boy stares, impressed, at the imposing figures of the flame mage and the muscular man, internally celebrating the perfect victory. The two band monsters stand side by side, back under the command of the famous Jinwoo god who needed weeks of mental torture to reunite them. The big guy adjusts the red cap on his head and looks around, completely disoriented about his own location, while the system panel recalls that he was considered the weakest piece of junk in the game for having ridiculous combat stats back in the day. Jinwoo displays a dark and calculating smile, reminding himself that the game's community was very dumb for ignoring that guy's true talent. The instructor explodes in an aura of motivational fire, yelling furiously like a sadistic sergeant, asking if they think physical training is some kind of child's play. The holographic screen displays the military man's skill set, focused exclusively on support, and the boy agrees that he would indeed get beaten by a low-level monster if he tried to fight alone. The sergeant's arm displays monstrous muscles as our protagonist concludes his thought, revealing that the instructor's secret power to drastically accelerate the evolution of any other unit makes him the most important gear in the entire summoner team. Ramba appears flying excitedly and calls out to her own unit, hugging the newcomer's muscular arm with sparkling eyes. The boy gives an excited smile, confirming that the ability to improve other summons is exactly why he became so absurdly stronger than all the other players of his time. On a quiet street at night, the big brown-haired guy gives a gentle nod, greeting his master in a firm voice. The sergeant stares at the horizon thoughtfully, murmuring the master's old nickname with a hint of nostalgia in his serious gaze. The girl with flame-red hair reacts, shocked, asking desperately if that person in front of them is really the legendary Jinwoo god. The military man kneels formally, paying respect to his master in a gesture of absolute loyalty, revering his presence. Keeping his head bowed, the sergeant confesses that after they were sealed for unknown reasons, he never imagined he would see him again in this life. On his knees, the man lifts his gaze and states with all sincerity that it is an immense honor to be able to meet him again. The red mage walks with slow steps, still trying to process the shock of hearing that nickname spoken in real life. The redhead stops in front of the boy and asks with wide eyes if he is indeed the legend who dominated the rankings, drawing a small laugh from our protagonist, who finds it unusual to hear her speak for the first time. The luminous panel displays the X-rank mage's stats, revealing her true origin and the attributes that make her a central piece of the magical offense. The screen details her primary fire damage ability, capable of incinerating the battlefield with a monumental and continuous roar. Despite the high damage, the mage had a serious problem in her original skill package that drastically limited her in prolonged fights. However, the secret description reveals that when combined with the instructor's special buff, she unlocks a broken passive of infinitely increasing her own damage after defeating dungeon boss monsters, which explains why the boy was the only one who could use her at her peak. The girl smiles, crying with emotion, staff in hand, calling for her master and affirming with a trembling voice how much she missed being by his side. The boy blinks awkwardly, his cheeks flushed, responding in a sweet and embarrassed way that he also missed the red-haired mage a lot. But he soon composes himself and warns the two new summons in a serious tone, not to call him Jinugod in front of other people. With the warning given, our protagonist relaxes his body, relieved, determining that it's now time to finally go home and get a decent night's sleep after so much sacrifice. The street, illuminated by the moon and the city's lampposts, hosts the solitary walk of the new and powerful team. The next day, inside a quiet room, the shadows of early morning dominate the environment. Jinwoo sits up in bed, stretching with a long yawn, showing he is rested after sleeping exhaustively. With a towel hanging around his neck, the boy spots the sergeant meditating and the mage sitting cross-legged on the floor. The sergeant and the mage chat, calmly agreeing that it has been a long time since they last saw each other. Ramba appears, flying, greeting the smiling duo, and recalling that they only saw each other for about a month before being locked in the quarantine seal. The military man confirms the memories, thoughtfully warning that at the time they were summoned, the boy was already at the peak of his glory. With a calm expression, the man with his arms crossed decrees that the past is of no importance, and that there is only one relevant thing he wishes to say at that moment. In a demonic and threatening tone, the sergeant fixes his gaze on the girls, screaming hysterically that the entire team is too weak. His heavy fist slams into his palm, cracking his knuckles as he mercilessly states that their level is pathetic for anyone wishing to serve a lord of that caliber. The big guy furiously points at the red-haired mage, dictating the first rule, yelling that even while the master is sleeping, the team must continue to train non-stop. He gives the first direct order, telling the girl to concentrate her magical energy to unlock her special ability, and the redhead promptly agrees. The military man's dark gaze immediately focuses on the Wind Fairy, announcing in an authoritarian tone that it's Ramba's turn to prepare for suffering. The little fairy shrinks behind our protagonist's back, clutching his clothes with evident fear on her face. The long-haired sergeant argues that her attack speed needs to be accompanied by brute force, and therefore he will subject her to a severe physical training regimen. The instructor presses, asking if the little one doesn't wish to be of some use to the master, and Ramba responds fearfully, stammering that of course she wants to be useful. Without a shred of pity, the big guy points to the frying pan in the kitchen, stipulating that for the first day, a light goal of 5,000 consecutive swings would be acceptable. The fairy panics, screaming in disbelief at the absurd number while tearfully begging Jinwoo to save her from this inferno. The boy rubs his sleepy eyes and walks straight past, ignoring Ramba's desperate pleas as he heads towards the bathroom, finding the team's effort very welcome. At the player's central headquarters, the morning sun's rays illuminate the wide office windows. An administrative agent places a letter-headed paper on the counselor's desk, informing him that an official order has just come down directly from the department director's office. The examiner frowned, surprised, questioning why such an important superior would be getting involved in something so small. The woman continues, saying that in addition to the order, they demanded a detailed report on the recent scroll expenditures, making the counselor curse mentally. The agent ponders thoughtfully, thinking it's likely that the rival politician is responsible for this sudden investigation, trying to expose some flaw in their management. The big, bearded man complains that the guy is nitpicking every single one of his decisions, making it difficult to release the materials. Out of options, he says worriedly that if the department holds up the requisitions, they will end up failing to deliver the day's batch to Baek Jinwoo. Shock hits Park Chang-seok's face as his phone screen lights up, revealing an urgent message right below. The counselor immediately despairs, grabbing the device from the table in a leap when he sees the boy's name. The employee looks on a bit confused and casually asks what's wrong. The man's face pales in panic, and the woman tries to understand the situation. Apparently, the message has a brutal impact as he stares at it with wide eyes. On the phone's display, the notification shows a direct and objective message saying that he will no longer need the material shipment, confirming that he already has what he wants. The midday sky shines blue over the landscapes of Mount Gwanakson. Jinwoo's boot steps firmly on a raised rock, ending his long hike up the mountain. The boy poses at the summit with a hand on his forehead, displaying a smile full of energy as he contemplates the stunning view of nature around him. A virtual menu projects the system's explanation, showing that the current structure divides challenges into 4 basic categories, with daily dungeons and normal local portals making up the bulk of the hunt. The illustration advances, detailing that the original Tower of Trials has become a relentless global structure, offering absurd rewards for those willing to risk their lives on floors of imminent doom. The screen cuts to show a chaotic dragon as an example of the last known category, focused on joint attacks that require huge teams and organized hunters. The hologram finishes explaining the mechanics, showing that only team leaders can handle the absurd scale of global raid dungeons where dozens of players unite. But for now, he points out that his focus is exclusively on a normal dungeon, the basic pillar of a hunter's day-to-day evolution. The young man descends the mountainside, walking towards an illuminated rift, remembering that these dungeons were called regular stages back on the mobile game and weren't lost in the middle of the woods like they are now. As he analyzes the recruitment requests on the screen, he calmly thinks to himself that there's no reason to look for allies on an app, since his solo power was more than enough. Putting the device in the pocket of his sports jacket, he continues on his determined path, focusing on the objective without hesitation. The dimensional portal appears before him, surrounded by caution tape fluttering in the wind, warning of the forbidden risk. He knows the containment was imposed by the government. After all, if a dungeon isn't closed in time, a break occurs, throwing uncontrollable monsters directly into the cities. 2 association officials with their arms crossed stand in the way and seriously demand to check his registration. The boy patiently hands over his official silver association card, confirming his identity without any problems. With the officials okay, he thanks them for the clearance, ready to face the rift. The guard opens the cordon, telling him to be very careful inside, and Jinwoo's figure disappears, pulled into the violent blue flash of the entrance. The young man's sharp eyes reflect the distorted environment as he dives deep into the dungeon the moment he enters the dark place. A shrill lightning bolt rips through the scenery as he looks up, facing the air of absolute tension. A blinding flash hits the center of the screen where he holds his position, prepared to unleash his skills in the dark. He reacts in shock at the sight around him, questioning in a disbelieving tone if this is some kind of torture chamber. With a brutal bang, the illustration expands the entire spiral map, revealing a colossal subjugation area with gigantic stairs and dozens of battles running in parallel. Above the castle, armored knights scream in despair that monstrous orcs are scaling the walls in search of blood and mayhem, yelling for boiling water. One of them doesn't resist the invasion and collapses in agony, cut down by the embedded blades of a monstrous thick-skinned creature, letting out terrifying screams before his end. The Smasher Orc crushes one of the guards with its own boot, reminding our protagonist that the memories of these dungeons being peaceful and simple don't apply to the brutality of now, where the fallen are no longer just colorful pixels. The enormous club comes down with force, smashing the stone floor and forcing a knight in silver armor to defend against the brutal impact. The wounded warrior bleeds profusely as his allies scream desperately, urgently calling for healers. Jinwoo observes the carnage from atop the wall, coldly agreeing that the situation below does indeed look like a real war. But the young man soon takes a deep breath, trying to compose himself and affirming to himself that he just needs to do what he has always done. The boy slaps his own face hard, forcing his thoughts back on track before commanding the team. Our protagonist cracks a focused smile, raising his hand and asking everyone to prepare for the imminent attack. The interface projects the blue panels of the Flame Mage, the Wind Fairy, and the instructor as they all take their positions. Bathed in the magical lights of the field, Jinwoo and his summons prepare to sweep the dungeon's monsters amidst the widespread confusion. The monkey and the D-rank fairy appear in the shadows with a flashing interface above, revealing the original strategy. With a firm voice, he orders Ramba to increase everyone's attack speed, telling the other 2 summons to cover the sergeant's back in case things get worse. The flame-haired redhead summons all her firepower with a psychotic smile and confirms the master's order, shouting with a voice raspy with excitement. The boy wastes no time and declares the main target, pointing to the back of the monster horde, indicating the giant orc boss. Leaping through the shocked soldiers, the monkey charges forward, brutally clearing a path through the enemy troops. In the center of the chaos, a greenish flash and lightning bolts spread the fury of the initial blow as the warriors fall, stunned. The Smasher orc roars with hatred and charges towards them, trying to stop them, but Jinwoo remains calm, stating that the subjugation pattern is ridiculously simple. The furious monster spins its giant club, ready to destroy everything in its path. However, the fairy and the sergeant collide head-on with the creature in a devastating clash of abilities, stopping the heavy attack in midair. Ramba crosses her arms with a pouty expression, casting support spells to strengthen the front line. With absurd speed, the sergeant shoots through the air, crushing the face of a smaller orc before advancing to the next target. From the top of the wall, our protagonist observes the instructor's efficiency, impressed that he has a much superior combat performance than in the game. The young man smiles calmly, concluding that the exploration will be much easier than he had imagined. Jinwoo's summons clear a path, violently tearing through the horde of monsters and spreading chaos throughout the blood-stained fortress. The human knights are left speechless, looking at the powerful creatures and asking in shock if those are also enemies or allies. In the midst of the carnage, an orc tries to resist, but is sent flying by the crushing punch of the hairy ape. The smaller fairy spreads healing spells across the area, saving the knights who were fighting to survive, recovering everyone's HP around them. Ramba becomes possessed with rage, dodging arrows and hysterically screaming at the cursed monsters to stop shooting at her. With beads of sweat on his forehead, the sergeant repels axes thrown in his direction, scolding the little fairy. The red-haired mage gathers an absurd amount of flames around her staff, preparing the ultimate incantation to incinerate the main enemy. She raises her red eyes and gives a crazed smile, yelling for the explosion to be unleashed at once. The monstrous form of a dragon made purely of fire springs from her spell, illuminating the entire fortress with the reddish glare of hell. The system description reports that the dragon form explosion projects colossal flames across the area, destroying the enemy ranks with ease. The orc leader faces the inferno of fire coming towards him, trembling before the magnitude of the power. Without wasting a single second, a heavy boot slams violently onto the ground, finishing the job. The instructor appears, sliding through the air, swinging his sword with mastery and tearing apart the enemies with brutal blows. Ramba jumps for joy, punching the air as the system message appears, confirming that the dungeon has been completely finished. Jinwoo and the sergeant remain intact among the fortress's rubble, proving that the boy's power is absolute even in real life. The luminous panel informs that the mage has advanced to level 8, improving her stats, which makes her eyes widen in pure wonder at the speed of her growth. At the same time, the instructor also levels up, and our protagonist lets out a relieved sigh, praising the valuable items the sergeant received and celebrating the extra cash. The reward system pours out the promised fortune, displaying the 500,000 won and leaving Jinwoo a bit incredulous at the high amount earned in just 2 minutes. The mage and the sergeant argue excitedly with Ramba in the background while the boy points to the horizon, saying he needs to find the next available rift soon. The young man punches the air excitedly, determined to use every second to his advantage and evolve his beasts while lining his own pockets. With a confident smile and a victorious pose atop the wall, the boy declares that from now on, his life will be an endless and insane marathon of daily dungeons. The gigantic glass building of the association mirrors the bright rays of the sun the next morning. The counselor audibly scoffs, resting his face in his hands on the office desk, appearing extremely frustrated and mentally exhausted. The administrative agent sighs at her boss's situation, observing how he wears himself out over petty disputes with the opposition. In an elegant meeting room, some men in suits get organized, discussing important matters in loud tones. A red-haired young man with an arrogant look sits relaxedly and makes the excuse that he is just offering friendly advice about the waste of public funds. Park Chang-seok frowns, visibly furious, retorting to the man while questioning his nerve to say something like that. The opponent laughs ironically, gesturing with his finger as he argues that all of the counselor's proteges have never reached the levels of the National Exploration Team. Annoyed, the counselor points his finger, reprimanding the redhead and demanding that he stop bragging just because he helped the current record holder of the Tuesday dungeon climb the ranks. An illustration shows the big guy gritting his teeth in front of the document with his rival's name, exuding his antipathy towards the man's arrogance. The big guy mentally confesses his desire to explode and let out all possible curses against his adversary, but remembers that the jerk has concrete merits, as the people sponsored by him really do join the national team every year, making him indeed a genius at creating ranking monsters, even if his arrogance is unbearable. With dark eyes, he refuses to silently accept the insults and demands to know what his enemy's attitude will be if the new talent he is cultivating reaches the national league this time. The redhead responds confidently and mockingly, challenging the bearded man to a bet if he was so sure about his victory. The rival points out that the national teams are limited to only 10 spots and perversely proposes a direct challenge over which of their proteges will secure the highest and most coveted place in these world ranks. The big guy swallows the provocation harshly and glares at his opponent, his face hardening as he accepts the bet on the spot. The scene splits, showing the angry caricatures of the two with bright sparks between them as the counselor seals the rules. The loser will publicly sign their defeat, acknowledge the adversary's superiority in hunter management, which includes resigning from their position, plus an additional penalty of 10 billion won as a withdrawal fee if anyone backs out before the time is up. In the office, the agent's eyes widen, disapproving of her boss's lack of control, and she warns in a dry tone about the stupidity of the bet, reminding him that Baek Jinwoo's real chances of competing there are slim, no matter how much he bets on the boy. Park Chang-seok admits, rubbing the back of his neck, saying he knows all of this perfectly well and that the redhead cornered him in front of everyone on purpose. The counselor sighs deeply, massaging the bridge of his nose as he tries to find a solution in his head, but is interrupted by a sudden bang. The big guy straightens his posture, arguing that if they invest heavily in logistical supplies for Jinwoo, he will certainly respond with some spectacular report that saves them. The door bursts open violently while the agent is still trying to convince her boss, and the assistant enters the office with a look of terror on his face, suddenly shouting the director's name. The woman throws her arms up, startled, asking what the heck is going on, while the young man in the suit trembles, handing an urgent black folder into her hands. Trembling from head to toe, the subordinate stammers, explaining that he investigated deeply into who had been clearing and emptying all the dozens of D-rank dungeons across the country alone in the past few weeks, and found something absurd. The counselor's jaw almost drops as he yells loudly, stunned upon hearing from the assistant that it was precisely Baek Jinwoo, the madman causing all that havoc across the country. The agent's eyes widen in disbelief, her own voice failing as she asks how it's possible for a newcomer to carry out that daily massacre in a category where people form teams to avoid getting wiped out. As he absorbs the insanity of the information, the bearded man's eyes turn to sparkle with pure pride, and he starts to let out a crazed laugh that echoes through the room, leaving the assistant completely paralyzed. The woman breaks into a cold sweat as the big guy laughs deafeningly, boasting that he always knew about his protege's genius, which was confirmed faster than anyone imagined. The counselor clenches his fist in exultant flames and confesses in a passionate roar that it was worth placing his hopes in that formidable boy, and now he could finally shut the redhead's mouth. In some random dungeon, Jinwoo nimbly jumps over a puddle of water, keeping his sneakers dry as he concentrates on the next objective. The young man focuses his eyes on the environment, adjusting his sweaty bangs before giving the final order, completely ignoring the commotion at the association. The image reveals the doors of his modest room, where a few boxes are neatly stacked in the corners. Jinwoo bursts into a crazed laugh, lying on his bed and looking at the banking app screen, which displays an incredible 16 million earned in that short hunting shift with his beasts. Resting a hand on his head, he blinks away his dark circles, laughing at his own exhaustion, impressed that he can make this daily fortune just by using his perfectly organized strategies. Our protagonist concludes his thoughts, watching from afar as his team destroys a smasher orc, proud and aware that he cleared 160 rifts non-stop in just 4 days like a true gaming maniac. The boy closes his eyes, reliving the moment the sergeant's sword tore through the enemies, and the mage's flames swept the battlefield, spreading terror and annihilating any obstacle. Clutching a wad of fake money in his thoughts, he cries with emotion, declaring that he sold all the extra scrolls he got on the market and made this absurd profit with his own blood, sweat, and tears. Lying on the floor of his modest apartment, Jinwoo raises his arms to the heavens, euphorically celebrating that he has finally found a world that revolves around his desires. He quickly sits up, adjusting his posture, and tells himself that now he needs to focus and manage his finances intelligently so as not to spend it all at once. Using both hands on his phone, he imagines an account dedicated exclusively to the month's basic costs, like food, electricity, water, and rent, also stating that he will create a fat savings account for his family to live well from now on. The boy mentally designs the project for his backup account, embracing his fortune and promising to save at least 10 million every month to invest in a comfortable retirement plan just for himself in the future. The bright headline in his imagination highlights a text that questions if it's possible for a failure to become a miracle player overnight, making a high profit, while he himself sighs, enchanted, saying that this amount was any loser's dream. Our protagonist's sharp gaze returns, fixing his attention on the bank screen. The app displays an extra balance of just over 6 million won under the title Player's Account. The image highlights a pile of valuable red crystals, as the boy determines that the rest of all the fortune collected daily will be 100% focused on enhancing his essential summons. Through the illuminated window, he evaluates his next steps, saying that saving and paying bills is vital, but he knows his true value and the guarantee of his future are purely tied to his ability to be the #1 player in the country, and the only way to achieve that is by getting strong fast. The flame mage, the smaller fairy, the sergeant, and the ape evolve, glowing in crystal particles, indicating that he has surpassed the main base of explorations, which required them all to reach level 30 to not be vulnerable, and he agrees in a confident tone that now the only way is up. Coldly analyzing the market, he concludes that grinding and farming in the daily dungeons remains the definitive plan to get money and materials with the greatest speed. Spinning the phone between his fingers with a sly smile, he murmurs if the parallel auction has anything useful available right now. Jinwoo is startled in the same second upon seeing the list of posted items. The market page shows C-rank scrolls for sale at a base price of 20 million won, making him grumble in an amazed tone about how ridiculously expensive they are. The shock only increases when he discovers that B ranks easily hit 200 million, while higher categories don't even show up in this level of amateur auction. The young man ponders, lying down, stating that this value actually makes sense considering the minuscule 1% chance of obtaining a C-rank item on the first try, not to mention the luck required for better ranks, which forces weaker players to fight for the lowest ranks in endless desperation. With a confident and devilish smile, he asserts that for him, all of this is great and perfectly manageable. Our protagonist's quick fingers type a new message, checking on the progress of his business partner's order. Instead of simply wearing himself out fighting against the crushing prices, the boy reasons that using and abusing the resources of the influential corporate sponsor he himself prepared is the best way out. In the official office, the scared assistant enters out of breath with a piece of paper in his hand, loudly calling the name of Councillor Park Chang-seok. The man raises an eyebrow surprised and asks, somewhat bored, what the problem is that caused such a rush. The nervous employee says they just received a new direct request from Baek Jinwoo, and the big guy blinks, stunned. The examiner taps his pen anxiously, wanting to know what kind of absurd reward the boy demanded this time, warning his aide that depending on the demand, he will use funds from his own pocket if the reward is valuable. With a confused expression, the assistant swallows hard. The screen glows, displaying the message where Jinwoo simply sends a long list containing the precise items he wants from the week's dungeons, instead of random scrolls or money. The assistant argues in a terrified tone that he asked the central to cover the immediate and direct purchase of this giant list on the parallel market, paying the very high prices dictated by the market. The counselor leans back, pulling his beard in frustration, asking the employee if even with all the access to the headquarters, the superiors would support funding a multi-million, one-off request for a ready-made list of intermediate-level creatures. The subordinate says quietly that in exchange for this logistical service, the boy promises to deliver not just one, but all of the week's time trial strategies without reservations and without a single delay all at once, making the bearded man's eyes widen. The assistant gestures, confused, questioning if Baek Jinwoo is really willing to hand over the information for the entire Monday and Wednesday dungeons in a single package if he receives those units from the list. The counselor processes the shock, his eyes widening even more as he understands the scale of the move, and says seriously that this maneuver is indeed very aggressive and grand. Clenching his jaw, he gets the message perfectly. With his face covered by the office shadows, he makes the decision right then and there, saying he will try his luck directly in the department director's office and asks the assistant to pray. Moments later, Park Chang-seok slams the table, enraged, screaming at the top of his lungs, cursing his own director as senile and useless because they didn't want to approve the requested transaction. The counselor's fury doesn't subside, and he throws a tantrum, hysterically stating that it's because of these imbecilic bureaucratic fears that the country is bogged down and stuck as the weakest in the world rankings. The short-haired agent crosses her arms, rolling her eyes and lamenting internally that the place would be better if the suits had half the passion of that madman for talent. The assistant scratches his head, explaining that the director denied direct access, stating that for the Central to disperse resources for ready-made summons from the market, they first need an absurd guarantee proving the boy's strategies in practice. Park Chang-seok growls, enraged, arguing the ridiculous contradiction and questioning what the heck is the point of the boy proving the secret of the daily rifts first, if he needs the beasts precisely to beat the times and get the proof that they are possible to be cleared. The big guy gestures furiously, saying that if the theory and the information passed on about those time attack tactics of the boy are proven in the dungeons, the profits and advancements would bring colossal fame, but that the headquarters was too dumb and narrow-minded to even calculate this small risk for a large gain. The agent ponders, crossing her legs, noting that the whole government situation is strange because selling that revolutionary rift knowledge for such a pittance in a direct trade was indeed weird. She evaluates the numbers with her thumb on her chin, questioning if the indirect price of the transaction he requested and the commercial value of the items on the market makes sense in relation to the billion in profits that the discoveries would generate. With a sharp smile and her eyes shining in her shadowy face, she analyzes the complete play, confirming that Jinwoo is smart. With everyone's attention in the room, the agent asks what if she herself resolved the situation and paid for the entire list's order out of her own pocket and in her own name, surprising the men in the room, who freeze at her sudden words. The examiner's jaw drops and he stammers for a second that he didn't know she had that kind of cash, and the assistant observes, stunned, as his boss is left speechless. The illustration highlights the clan's financial assets, revealing the agent in the suit as Yu Jia and her being the fourth granddaughter and legitimate heiress of the monstrous and influential global corporation, the Daeseong Group, the #1 in finance and investments in Korea. The panel emphasizes her impeccable childhood and the brilliant, global Chaebol-level education she received from a young age, molding her into an unprecedented executive package. However, at some point in her youth, the analytical information and data guided her with certainty, focusing her cerebral empire solely on an interest that bordered on a controlling obsession. Corporate investment in the direct management of the lives of the biggest and best players in the rankings, hunting for diamonds in the hunter market before they grew, to use their success in the financial world later. Her seductive features amidst the lights show that lately, of all the prodigies cataloged and evaluated, the raw talent of recruit Baek Jinwoo stood out bizarrely, surpassing consolidated veterans in importance and fascination, becoming the most fascinating bet of the moment. The hologram displays the majestic presence of the young man, stating that despite his age and appearance, he demonstrates an absurdly vast tactical background, even daring to play a dangerous game by negotiating terms directly with his own country on equal footing. The woman clenches her fist and breaks into an ambitious smile at the meeting, stating that if they could sign the exclusivity contracts, setting up a super family-owned company focused on autonomous management, the sky would be the limit for mining that hunter's talents. The assistant agrees, swallowing hard as she proposes to use their entire money network at once, paying up front, using confidential information from the tactics to share the immense return among themselves in the secrecy of their own walls, without the involvement of the bureaucracy of the idiot directors at the national security headquarters who were too slow to understand the bet on success, but she warns the counselor, arguing that operating this model is strictly against the hunter security rules proposed by the state. The young woman raises her eyebrows at the fearful assistant, asking with genuine disdain if he's the one who's going to be afraid to pay a fortune for these investments, or if, in fact, she's the one who owns all the freaking money in the end. Joking and humiliating the nervous bosses, she laughs sweetly, quietly mocking both of them, cynically asking if they were afraid her poor, meager little bank account might go bankrupt from using a few million. With a piercing gaze returning to the frightening sobriety of the business world, she assures and finalizes the requests coldly, telling the team to forget about her cash because she has unlimited funds. A slight shadow marks her words, indicating calculated caution before she proceeds, warning the men from the association that meeting and closing contracts personally with this unpredictable genius is mandatory now. With her legs crossed in the private room of an exquisite and secluded restaurant, the heiress of Daeseong admires the establishment's interior, waiting patiently under the classic wooden lamps of the place. She reacts attentively, turning her penetrating gaze the exact instant the dry sound of the sliding door opening reverberates through the cracks. Guided by the refined environment's suited receptionist, Jinwoo enters with a cautious air, thanking the gentle and respectful escort, and is greeted by the young woman who cordially wishes him to make himself at home in the secluded setting. He lets out a low laugh, confirming that in the end, the association headquarters took the bait and accepted the generous payments for the list, and he comments ironically on his phone about the movements of the latest messages, pointing out that 300 million on the table would be seen as mere pocket change by executives full of ambitions for quick success, and that he would use this fact without compassion. The boy shrugs, internally commenting with a bored expression as the distinguished waiters bow before him, and says with a cute face that in general, these expensive environments blow any overly starred hotel out of the water in terms of attention. Our protagonist evaluates again and realizes that the perks wouldn't be free, knowing that the corporations would act like hungry dogs for the next game tactics and prepare red carpets to flatter him, finding the scene of receiving such treatment ironic and satisfying. The young man smiles formally as he approaches and greets the newly arrived hostess face-to-face with a gentle hello. The woman firmly confirms who she is in the low light, in a confident posture, keeping the imposing contours of her image untouchable, without showing any fragility. The player's sharp intuition flashes an alert, recalling in his thoughts the frantic searches he conducted with the woman's names, finding a treasure trove in the reports and corporate portfolios published under her name. She was a graduate and expert in big numbers, in addition to being poised as the future supreme financial chief, and discovering the scandal of her not pursuing global empire leadership to hunt players without limits, which gave him a mini heart attack on the couch at the moment of reading, for dealing with such real influence. The young man's mind projects how bizarre it is that the top prodigy of conglomerates could act as a mere support supervisor within a headquarters, and he remembers the insane adjectives engraved in her file about her unquestionable intellect before realizing he underestimated the organization at first, laughing nervously and sweating at his own audacity and social limitation in the case. They take their cozy chairs, exchanging polite greetings about the generous reception from the previous day, when he cuts the formality with a surprised murmur, checking the room and asking directly if the executive came alone. Ujaya unleashes the boy's nightmare with a seductive laugh, confirming and tilting her neck with a lethal predator's gaze, indicating that indeed the big shots from the Seoul Summit Association had no business with him, and that the true sponsor at the table was none other than the person in front of him, the rich woman herself in the flesh, masterfully surprising him on the spot. The chopsticks pick up the perfectly cooked piece of fish served at the feast in front of him, and Jinwoo's eyes dart and he reacts, a bit embarrassed, lamenting that the main counselor was ultimately incapable in the executive chain of releasing the bare minimum of the requested orders, but he focuses on business and ignores it. Jaya slowly sips her wine, maintaining the suspense, sadly agreeing and pointing out the department's constant negligence, claiming with dark calmness that the old idiots were too stupid and slow to bet on grand profits and easily backed down from helping Counselor Park if they didn't find proof or got scared about money allocated to a blind hunt. But she calmly emphasizes with deadly silence that the headquarters did indeed back down. The young woman argues while an illustrated panel of the counselor fruitlessly fights against ignorant monsters, saying that despite Superior Park's pleas, the barrier of opponents who coveted the resources blocked the logistical operations, making it clear that the association had no more money to burn on the hunter. But the chibai version of the young man laughs calmly, chewing on a roasted piece and not giving a darn about the opposition, arrogantly thinking that without them, his rise through the ranks would be the same, done through sheer force, because his clearing power was absolute. Interrupting his indifference, the agent puts down her fork and stares fixedly into the boy's right eye, warning him without beating around the bush that in place of the headquarters, she personally will make the true proposal of a financial alliance in history, capturing the boy's innate curiosity in the low-flying pass of the dangerous negotiation. Jinwoo slowly focuses, placing his glasses on the side table and putting on his best poker face for the woman, while her irises trap him, perfectly stating the dangerous phrase of setting up an agency. A flash fills the perverse and beautiful smile of the negotiator, driving home the demand without loopholes, stating with lethal determination the full confession that she will fund the multi-million-dollar management firm for him solely for the purpose of exclusive management, only for the boy's orders, without institutional barriers tying his life to hers by direct contract. Jinwoo drops the pieces in atomic shock and blinks his eyelids, processing that she was proposing the most coveted and blind form of a focused and autonomous company for just one person in a multi-million-dollar contract, an echo that stuns his immediate thought with a dull thud. Analyzing the proposal, our protagonist realizes that the offer is not bad at all, since a corporation moves strictly for profit, unlike the headquarters, which prefers to play it safe. Jinwoo is fully aware that the one thing he needs most at the moment is a connection to inexhaustible resources, capable of buying his information for the highest possible value. Faced with the promise of total support offered by the heiress in the Deseong Empire, the boy wonders if there could be a better place to ally himself. Holding her glass, the woman displays a charming smile, stating that money never lies, and praises the young man, saying he seems like an incredible person, justifying that it's natural to invest heavily in a talent like his. The glasses rest on the illuminated table as the agent says she will explain the details along with the contract, promising to visit him at the empty lot the next day. The boy almost chokes on his drink, surprised to hear the executive tell him to check the summons he had requested, since the contract hadn't even been signed yet. The woman's face gains mysterious shadows as she calmly reveals that they were already preparing the order regardless of the formal agreement. Displaying a gentle smile, Jaya asks him to consider it a mere gift, leaving our protagonist amazed by the generosity of the super-rich. Time passes and the landscape cuts to a quiet mountainous area with signposts. Light footsteps echo on the trail as the voice of our protagonist's younger sister calls for him, deducing that the young man must be training there again. Ajin walks through the open terrain, grumbling about her brother's disappearance, who not only hasn't been in touch but has also found his own place to live. Suddenly, the girl stops walking, and her eyes widen as she notices an unexpected presence in the area. Walking gracefully through the area, Agent Jaya exudes elegance, leaving our protagonist's sister completely enchanted by her beauty. Ajin takes a step back, recognizing the familiar face and trying to remember where she saw that woman on social media. Pulling her phone from her pocket, the girl opens the app and gets a huge shock upon confirming the rich woman's profile, realizing the important figure standing there in front of her. Trembling with shock, the girl covers her mouth with her hands, hardly able to believe that the famous Yu Jaya is visiting this backwater place. The sound of panting echoes through the terrain, cutting through the tranquility of the surrounding nature. The face of the training instructor appears furious, demanding at the top of his lungs that the team push even harder. The big sergeant shouts that they will only evolve if they surpass their absolute limits, while the fairy cries from exhaustion and the other summons work themselves to the bone with exercises. Hiding behind a tree, Ajin spies on the madness happening at her brother's camp. Little Ramba notices her approach and alerts the group, asking for silence, while the flame mage continues her heavy physical training under the sergeant's supervision. Jinwoo wipes his sweaty face with a towel, letting out a sigh of relief at being able to take a break from that hell of repetitions. The executive approaches elegantly, greeting the young man and noting that he's been training hard since the early hours of the morning. Maintaining his composure, our protagonist replies that it's just a light warm-up, while the woman observes the exotic creatures, impressed by the team's formation and admitting she has never seen some of those monsters before. Giving a sheepish laugh, the boy states that those are his main partners and promises to introduce them formally later, while the instructor orders the squad to get back to their heavy workout in the background. The agent smiles mysteriously and says she will deliver his gift first, summoning blue energy into her hands. Jinwoo focuses his vision on the holographic screen that suddenly appears in front of him, awaiting the promised transfer. The system emits an intense glow, announcing that player Yu Jaya has just proposed an official trade, requiring a careful review of the proposal. As the mechanics of the old game were adapted to reality, the system allows for direct trade between hunters, facilitating negotiations of valuable items and rare units without the need for physical money. Without hesitation, the young man accepts the transaction, receiving the acquired beasts directly into his virtual inventory in the blink of an eye. This system protection is absolute, guaranteeing deadly and immediate punishments with brutal electric shocks for any wise guy who tries to pull a fast one during negotiations. The screen displays the complete list of intermediate monsters that the woman bought on the black market, and the boy presses the confirmation button without a second thought. A shower of magical particles envelops our protagonist, confirming that the reinforcement squad has been successfully transferred to his account. Jinwoo gives a polite bow, immensely thanking her for the valuable gift, while the executive returns the kindness, saying it was the least she could do. Resting her executive briefcase, the woman takes out the confidential paperwork and gives a focused smile, suggesting they move straight to business matters. The proposal involves the creation of an exclusive management agency called Ubik, headquartered in an imposing and modern building. The company's name is a combination of their surnames, and the ownership division guarantees 70% of the profits to the boy, while she gets the remaining 25%. The contract also allocates 5% of the shares to Councillor Park Chang-seok, ensuring the politician continues to facilitate things for them from within the association. Furthermore, the woman reveals that she has already hired the councillor's 2 assistants to work at the new firm, comically explaining that she had the young men resign from the government that very morning by offering them triple the salary. Jinwoo breaks into a cold sweat at the agent's corporate aggressiveness, but tries to raise a question about the presented terms. Although grateful, the young man asks if she is sure she wants to cede the majority of the profits to him, and the woman calmly replies that this is her personal way of making bets. She guarantees her 25% with the absolute promise that she will use all her financial genius to maximize that value to the extreme. The executive's gaze becomes dark and calculating, making it clear that the money itself is not the main focus, but rather the building of an unbreakable partnership with the most promising player in the country. Jaya states in a seductive tone that this is the moment to set greed aside and focus on solidifying the bond between the two, while the young man carefully analyzes the papers. Without further hesitation, the red stamp is pressed firmly onto the document, officially sealing the multi-million-dollar deal with the name Baek Jinwoo. The notification glows, confirming the completion of the contract, and the boy shakes the woman's hand with a confident smile, entrusting his career to the care of the firm's newest director. Yoo Jae-ah returns the handshake firmly, guaranteeing that she will take perfect care of everything from that moment on. Hidden among the trees, a shadow elf silently observes the negotiation, keeping its guard up. The sudden sound of breaking branches in the thicket catches the boy's attention, and he immediately turns his head. Jinwoo's eyes widen in surprise as he tries to identify the source of the suspicious sound that interrupted the meeting. A sharp scream rips through the air, coming directly from the bushes, startling the pair who were sitting on the bench. The shadow elf's armored boot steps onto the asphalt, revealing the creature emerging from the shadows with agility. The summon's automatic hunting system kicked in, and the elf lifts Ah-jin upside down, holding her by the leg, while our protagonist lets out a murmur of pure confusion. The younger sister's face turns red with embarrassment and anger at the humiliating situation, while the young man questions what the heck she's doing spying there. The director laughs at the scene, amused, and comments that she intended to meet the boy's family soon because of the relatives clause in the contract, but Jinwoo cuts the mood, asking that the introduction not be made in such an embarrassing way. Annoyed by the mystery, the little sister struggles and yells, demanding that our protagonist explain this whole weird situation once and for all. Ah-jin adjusts her clothes, panting, maintaining a serious expression and crossing her arms, waiting for convincing answers. The young man looks away at the illuminated sky, hesitating for a second before confessing the truth to his sister. The girl quickly pieces things together, deducing that since he was a famous player in the past, he ended up attracting the attention of the headquarters and the executive, concluding in shock that he was the one who broke the national record a few days ago. Jinwoo nods his head, agreeing with his sister's theory, confirming that she got everything spot on. The girl places a hand on her chin, processing the information with a suspicious expression. She squints her eyes and reminds her brother that he spent his whole life addicted to another little mobile game long before all this happened, catching the young man off guard. Jinwoo breaks into a cold sweat and quickly denies the story, making up the excuse that Summoner's Battle was a different game that he played for only a year, as he is still keeping the identity of the famous Jinwoo god an absolute secret. Ah-jin shakes his shoulders, demanding to know if he discovered some secret ability in that junk game from the past, while our protagonist tries to hide his internal panic. The two siblings sit side by side on the park bench, with the boy sighing wearily and concluding that this is the price to pay for trying to keep secrets from one's own family. The girl gives a sincere smile, clarifying that she doesn't doubt the character of the rich director he just closed a deal with. The sister's gaze becomes a bit heavy as she grips the bench's upholstery, remembering that in today's world, there is always the risk of the unpredictable and of lethal danger. Our protagonist fondly recalls the sacrifice of his parents, who took care of him for 3 years while he was in a coma, deciding internally that he would never drag them into a life of unnecessary risks without first having absolute power. With a hardened expression, he decrees that he needs to become strong enough to protect everyone around him, and that he will only reveal his true face when that day comes. The boy turns his head and promises to explain the whole situation to his parents at the right time, asking Ah-jin to keep the secret for now, but the girl suddenly changes the subject. The younger sister points to the open field, saying that there is a specific reason she is bringing up this whole issue of strategies now. She draws his attention to her shadow elf, who continues to train its agility along with the sergeant and the mage in the background. Jinwoo finds the mention of the dark creature strange, asking what the heck is so special about her partner. A dark projection of a lethally attacking shadow wolf fills the screen as the girl explains that if he plans to evolve the elf, he will mandatorily need to combine it with this specific wolf to fight as a pair. Looking at her phone, Ajin warns in an expert tone that the canine creature is a B-rank monster, and that without this synergy, the poor elf wouldn't be able to deliver even 10% of its real combat efficiency. Holding her phone, Ajin grumbles indignantly, wondering how on earth she's going to buy a B-rank monster if there's nothing available on the market. The girl types frantically on the screen with a look of pure frustration on her face. Jinwoo calls his little sister in a provocative way, making the young woman look up from her device, still looking bored. She turns her phone screen to him, showing that the absurd price of a shadow wolf is 500 million won, and complains that it would take her about 20 years to save up all that cash. With a confident smile on his face, our protagonist holds up his own phone and tells his sister to just wait. The young man guarantees with absolute certainty that he will get the creature for her within a month, making Ajin let out a mocking laugh as she questions if he's really going to give her something worth 500 million. The young woman stretches her legs on the park bench, joking that her brother is trying to act too cool just because he became an official player, and tells him to forget about it, promising she'll save the money herself. The wind blows through Jinwoo's hair as he maintains an unshakable and serene posture in the face of her refusal. He retorts, warning the girl not to cry with emotion when she finally receives the gift, while Ajin watches him with an intrigued look, feeling that something in him has profoundly changed. The two get up to leave, and the young man calls his team to end the day's training under his sister's suspicious gaze. The girl silently reflects that her brother seems to have become a completely different person since he started pulling all-nighters. Exactly 1 week passes, and the scene changes to the entrance of an official dungeon zone surrounded by security guards. Jinwoo arrives at the location, confused, asking what all this reception means, while the suited employees give a respectful bow. Director Jaya approaches, adjusting the equipment on the boy's shoulder, and declares that the Ubik company's first big deal will be the sale of valuable information. A holographic screen displays the business plan, revealing that they will record the young man's performance in the dungeons to sell the clearing videos as exclusive and very expensive content. The panel displays a state-of-the-art technological vest, which the executive describes as advanced and essential equipment for their project. The suit system is activated, demonstrating its ability to map the environment in 360 degrees, ensuring a perfect three-dimensional recording of the hunt. Our protagonist easily puts on the equipment and notes with admiration that the material is very flexible and light, causing no discomfort to his combat movements. Outside, one of the team's employees adjusts his cap and earpiece, ready to start the simultaneous broadcast. The operator's fingers fly over the keyboard, adjusting the final technical details on the association's control panel. Jaya confirms that the recording is ready, while the boy sighs tensely, thinking that this whole superproduction is much more stressful than simply filming with a cell phone. The young man says it's his first time entering the Monday dungeon, so he's not sure if the clearing will be completely perfect, but the woman reassures him, guaranteeing that they can just edit the best moments later. Jinwoo lowers his head slightly, thanking the director for her support with a gentle smile on his face. With his back to the team, he turns his head with a sharp look and a confident smile, asking if there's any problem if he ends up breaking the national record on his first try. The executive is surprised by the boy's audacity, remembering that he just said the hunt might not be clean, and she starts to break into a cold sweat, wondering if the pressure of the money has gone to his head. Our protagonist guarantees that he's perfectly fine, and the woman asks him not to push himself, advising him to play comfortably as he did back when he was just a regular player. With his sneakers firm on the ground, the boy walks towards the reddish dimensional rift, as the data informs that the current record for that dungeon is approximately 7 minutes. The violent light of the portal engulfs Jinwoo's body as he processes the time he needs to beat to shock the country. A dark, excited smile appears on his face, and the young man murmurs with total conviction that he can clear this challenge with great ease. The scenery changes drastically, revealing the interior of the Monday dungeon, a devastated environment covered in a red mist under an apocalyptic sky. A red rune floats on the screen as the narrator explains that this is the only dungeon in the system capable of providing stones related to attack power. The panel displays a handful of defense and vitality runes, revealing that, as in any game, attack power is the most valuable statistic, while defensive items are treated as useless junk on the market. Jinwoo observes the desolate horizon, aware that without offensive strength, a player can do absolutely nothing, even though this place is classified as a defense dungeon. A terrifying horde of undead skeletons runs frantically through the scenery, confirming the rule that players normally need to withstand the waves of enemies for a solid 30 minutes. The global leaderboard appears, proving that completion time is still the determining factor for ranking, indicating that there is a shortcut to close the rift faster. The macabre figure of the final boss emerges at the back of the horde, revealing that although it is a survival mission, if the evil lick is destroyed, the challenge ends on the spot. The boy adjusts the communication device on his jacket collar, confirming that the recording equipment is working perfectly, and points out that attacking the boss directly has already become the standard strategy among hunters. With a quick tap in the air, our protagonist opens the system's holographic interface to organize his assault. The floating window displays the summoning options, informing him that he has a total of 3 pre-configured teams, and asking him to choose which squad he wants to materialize. Displaying a methodical smile, he explains that he has left these formations ready specifically for direct confrontations, player versus player disputes, and daily explorations. The magical light shines, confirming the arrival of the combat sheriff, the training instructor, and a smaller gorilla nicknamed Minhwa. Next, golden beams announce the summoning of the Angel of Peace and the Golden Dragon Fairy, completing the specialized team for the mission. The system's red alert flashes on the screen, warning that the Lick's undead army is approaching and instructing the player to hold out until reinforcements arrive, while Jinwoo assumes a combat stance. The holographic countdown timer appears in the dark sky, setting exactly 30 minutes for the end of the challenge, illuminating the fully prepared team for the massacre. The virtual clock starts its countdown, marking 29 minutes and 59 seconds, dictating the official start of the carnage. The tide of skeletons advances crazily across the cracked earth, ready to devour the living intruders. Minhwa takes the lead and lets out a terrifying roar as it gathers momentum and leaps high towards the enemy crowd. The ape's massive fists collide with the horde, crushing the undead skulls with a brutal impact. The creature goes into a frenzy, tearing through the enemy ranks with its bare hands, sending dark fluids flying everywhere. The monster's bones are easily shattered as Jinwoo watches the spectacle, praising the initial performance. The boy extends his hand forward, his eyes shining with determination, ordering the rest of the team to advance and begin the slaughter. The scene quickly returns to the flashback in the park, where our protagonist confronts his sister on the bench after catching her spying. Ajin remains kneeling on the dirt ground with an expression of pure guilt and embarrassment on her face. The young man crosses his arms and deduces the story, asking if she simply recognized the executive on the street and decided to follow her for being an obsessed fan, while the girl tries to justify herself, saying it was just curiosity. The young woman points to herself proudly, defending her actions, but the system ironically decrees that this is the exact definition of stalking, dealing a critical blow to her ego. The boy questions in a disappointed tone if she decided to just hide there and watch upon realizing the executive was meeting with him, applying a brutal honesty effect on the girl. Pushed against the wall, Ajin gets flustered, stammering that that's exactly what happened, trying not to lose her composure. Losing her patience, the young woman grabs her brother by the collar, shaking him and demanding to know how on earth a common guy like him would have any connection with a rich woman of that level. Jinwoo breaks into a cold sweat, swaying from side to side as his sister yells, asking what he did to get that meeting, and the young man desperately thinks that the situation has become too complicated to explain. The narrative returns to the Red Rift, revealing the monstrous and gigantic figure of the Lick hovering in the dark air, observing the battlefield from above. Our protagonist strategically walks through the cratered terrain, accompanied by the Shadow Elf, while the other creatures fight on the front line. The boy gives the first instruction to the swordsman, telling them to secure the advantage by moving to higher ground. The brown-haired elf nods his head silently, agreeing with his master's order. The narrator comments that the elf acted intelligently, realizing that the cameras were recording and deciding to keep his mouth shut so as not to leak information. Jinwoo runs at full speed up the rocky slope, checking the floating clock, which now shows just over 26 minutes remaining. The young man mentally analyzes the route, pointing out that it only took him 2 minutes to reach that advantageous position. Down below, the Angel of Peace fires holy light blasts, purging the undead, while the boy delegates the clearing of smaller enemies to the team below. The Shadow Elf springs into action with a mortal leap, slicing through the skeletons with swift and precise cuts from its blade. The gorilla's huge hairy hand grabs a monster's skull and crushes it as if it were paper. Minhwa roars furiously, dominating the area and imposing its bestial strength against the weakened horde. The combination of holy magic and brute force generates an impact wave that sweeps dozens of skeletons off the map at once. Our protagonist cracks a satisfied smile, praising the excellent work of the ape and the elf, confessing that he even feels shivers of pride for commanding such efficient creatures. Standing atop the cliff, Jinwoo finally comes face to face with the gigantic lick, which floats surrounded by a purple aura on the other side of the field. He turns his head and calls for the combat sheriff, ordering the sniper to get ready as the man in the cap aims at the target with his precision rifle. A comical illustration shows that although the sheriff has impeccable aim and an absurd range, the damage of his bullets is so pathetic that in the past, the community simply ignored the existence of this useless unit. A shocked player yells at the screen, perplexed by the information that the dungeon requires the avatar to stay there for 32 hours on auto mode without guaranteeing victory. With an ironic smile, Jinwoo comments that this only applied in the old days and explains that in the low-rank Monday dungeon, this specific unit is actually a gift from the gods due to the lick's average HP. The sniper prepares to pull the trigger, but our protagonist raises his hand, telling him to wait for the right moment to attack. In a beam of golden light, the Angel of Peace raises its hands in a prayerful gesture, casting the magic known as Gleam and Blessing. The blinding light illuminates the entire battlefield as the sniper adjusts his cap, awaiting the spell's effect. The panel reveals that the blessing's impact on the enemy is direct, instantly breaking the immunity shield the monster had against long-range attacks. Displaying a mischievous smile, the boy decrees that the path is clear and that the moment of truth has arrived. The finger squeezes the trigger without hesitation, and Jinwoo coldly orders the combat sheriff to open fire on the unprotected enemy. The instructor's eyes glow with an intimidating energy as he strengthens all his allies with his sergeant's motivational fury. Bathed in a bright pink aura, the shadow elf gains an insane strength boost, leaps towards the lick, and shatters its magical defense with its longsword. At the same time, the powerful gorilla concentrates pure energy in both hands and lands a crushing blow on the ground, creating a shockwave through the scenery. The destruction advances, pushing everything in its path, clearing the way for the ape's perfect assault. With an agile and majestic movement, the Angel of Peace directs all its support directly to the sniper, strengthening him to the extreme. The boy wastes no time and determines the second step, activating the Golden Fairy to supercharge the sniper's attack with all the brilliance of her magic. A bullet fired at supersonic speed cuts through the air, propelled by all the team's buffs, while the combat sheriff maintains a firm stance against the weapon's recoil. A long and apprehensive silence takes over the entire dungeon as the dust and wind carry away the last fragments of the shot, leaving Jinwoo sweating with a tense, sheepish smile. The scene focuses on the lick's tattered cloak, where the ridiculous damage flashes on the screen, showing that the formidable attack dealt an incredible 2 HP to the boss, even making the creature tilt its head to the side in a comical tone of confusion as to why they would shoot something so weak at it. The sniper unloads the glowing bullets non-stop, the muffled sound popping and ricocheting off the monster, proving that despite the undead mage's small HP pool, the boss's health is indeed decaying, but the slowness is still excruciating. The boy scratches his cheek, embarrassed, and sighs wearily at the ridiculous sight, confessing in his thoughts that the raw damage caused by the so-called combat sheriff is indeed pitiful and almost laughable when compared to conventional monsters of an equivalent rank. The boss raises its arms menacingly in the air, roaring in fury with its eyes glowing with pure red magic, preparing its dark attack to punish the mockery of that pathetic group. Jinwoo coldly analyzes the monster's fury while reflecting that people used to say this slowness in killing the boss was the standard rule in the dungeon, indicating that besides the useless and boring runes of that level, the effort didn't compensate for the enormous loss of time and resources that regular teams devoted to the daily rifts. He smirks, pointing out that in the end, the entire community labeled the tactic as terribly inefficient and dumb, thus explaining why absolutely no one in the past was stupid enough to build expensive teams based on a character that only dealt 2 points per shot. The panel focuses on a streaking bolt of lightning as the young man calmly concludes his thought with a however, anticipating the ace up his sleeve and the brilliant strategy he's hiding. Minakong flies in a thunderous leap, crushing smaller skeletons in a bloody burst. Next, the undead shriek in astonishment as the chain spells tear apart and empty the entire health bar of the main monster, revealing the true genius of the perfect squad he designed in his head. With an imposing stance under the oppressive shadow of the apocalyptic environment, the boy gives a confident and arrogant smile, finishing his line of reasoning by dictating in a loud, dark voice that this laughable inefficiency is something that strictly affects and applies to common and lazy players. The tip of his boot digs into the rocky earth, asserting the authority of his confidence in the place. The brutal combined blows, along with the incessant rain of precision bullets from above, begin to disintegrate the skeletons by the dozens, tearing them apart in the wind with astonishing speed. The boy's relaxed and focused posture dominates the air at the same moment the perfect attacks of the melee monsters and the sheriff's shots are shown side by side, with the beasts bathed in magical light, as he calmly dictates that the weak rule does not apply to him. Jinwoo mutters in a cold tone as the rift dissipates that the difference is using the blonde fairy's abilities with the attack speed, that the insane potential maximized buffs generated by the hidden figure of Hunjio cause. The screen illuminates the power of a focused shot that completely shatters the environment, revealing that a powerful dark mage-like that would be destroyed in a simple blink of an eye by that overpowered team. The explosion shatters the dark force of that monstrous boss, proving the final lethality of the assembled squad, and confirming that the combo was executed with absolute perfection. The Lick's empty, ownerless ghostly cloak collapses in on itself in the middle of the dungeon's mist, finally decreeing that the intense combat has reached its victorious and untroubled conclusion. The summons celebrate the victory, bathed in supportive auras in a glorious atmosphere, with the little fairy flying in relief while the panting ape puffs out its chest, and they all celebrate the smooth elimination of the challenge amidst the red ruins of the stage. The panels flash wildly, congratulating him for the monumental and simultaneous unlock, showing that he once again shattered the unattainable record in Korea, accompanied by the Spoon Killer achievement, which makes the young man mentally joke in a chibi drawing, mocking the effort required. Director Jaya, with a hand on her hip, looks disbelievingly at the illuminated screen, commenting with nervous admiration that she truly can't believe the kid went for the attack without even hesitating. The woman's subordinate speaks in a respectful tone, recalling that the transfer of the valuable units was made just a week ago, and they didn't even know if the boy had already synchronized or evolved them to acceptable levels that would allow for such a brutal breach of efficiency in real dungeons. The assistant nods in agreement with his boss, acknowledging the risks of forcing a hasty play on the rookie at such a delicate moment in the game. Turning to the main monitor, Yu Jia reflects aloud with a serious air about whether their recruit would be capable of revolutionizing the tactics in all the base classes of the daily game, not just focusing on sporadic records, but becoming the constant centerpiece of the country's own ecosystem. The young man responds sheepishly, correcting himself, explaining that his previous victory was indeed impressive, but he points out in a terrified tone that his feats in the tower are not enough to guarantee profit, as the boy hasn't even provided the guidelines to prove how they would apply the magic in practice. The screen quickly cuts to an interactive clipboard that details how skilled veterans reign in the Monday dungeon, and the aide anxiously questions if this whole charade could just be an irresponsible bluff if he were to be exposed in real, higher-level competitions in the ranks. Pushing a dark lock of hair back, the woman faces him with the sharp confidence that is natural to her, subtly retorting by asking if he really loses sleep distrusting a protege of the board. The boy freezes, terrified, bowing his head to his superior, knowing he has stepped into forbidden territory by doubting her corporate instincts, and he shrinks against the wall, breaking into a cold sweat. The heiress delivers the message directly in the blue-lit lobby, engraving her cruel philosophy into the subordinate's mind, declaring smoothly and cynically that the money involved in that gigantic transaction came purely from her own capital and not the state's. Disconcerted and trembling, the aide hastily assures his boss that if the billion-won bet were to sink like the others, he would stand by her regardless of the scandal, sealing his total obedience to the crazy risk they just bought into together, and hoping with his life in his hands not to be disappointed by the Prodigy kid's response. The assistant's eyes well up as he idolizes the magnate with the aura of an angel who promises payment even if things go wrong, calling this a divine work environment. The comical image shows the subordinates drooling with gratitude and promising blind dedication, while the executive laughs mentally, concluding that these false kindnesses are useful. The executive grimly adjusts her hair, acknowledging to herself that she did this because she has all the money and power necessary to silence problems if they occur. Under the shadow of the leaves, she stares at the virtual image of Baek Jinwoo glowing green, confessing with a mischievous smile that she is absolutely certain he is hiding some broken trick up his sleeve that will change everything soon. Jinwoo, with his jacket in the wind, displays a psychopathic look of determination, confirming her suspicion as he says in her memory that his insane confidence will make the risk worthwhile. The woman admits with admiration that he acts with overwhelming confidence in the face of the rifts, as if they were nothing more than childish mobile games. Suddenly, the aide stops short and turns abruptly, stammering in shock, yelling at the top of his lungs that the monitor's data just flashed and the Monday record was just obliterated before their eyes. The sound of desperate typing invades the screen, indicating the widespread astonishment at the base as operators try to understand the blow. A technician runs over, pulling papers and informing the stunned room that the time for the lowest level rift was sliced by an absurd 3 minutes compared to the original veteran, which was a practically monstrous and incomprehensible feat in the normal eyes of the association. The operators pull up the file on the panels and shout in shock at the kid's face, confirming that once again, it is the infamous Baek Jinwoo, the man humiliating the entire league. The subordinate's jaw drops and his glasses reflect the astonishing statistics on the blue screen, where the boy's name dethrones the isolated rank, crushing the former leader in a display of superiority, as he mutters in disbelief at the spectacle of the tactical massacre. Disbelieving celebratory shouts take over the entire command panel, with the staff roaring through the room, ecstatic and sweaty from the live proof that the record was shattered in the player's first clean and flawless incursion into the rift. The assistant's hands tremble uncontrollably before the miracle on the display, while the director swallows hard, confirming her theories. The agent clenches her fists tightly in the center of the control central, the adrenaline of power rising and boiling in her head. With a psychotic smile, the young woman lifts her face, covered in shadows in the room, and asserts with the most venomous and calculating tone of her life that the business will bring astronomical profits, and the triumph of the corporate empire has only just begun to gear up. With her hands in her pants pockets and a dangerous, devilish smile on her face, the executive internally dictates that if everything goes as she has architected, they will dominate the country financially, turning it into the most absolute success the association has ever witnessed. Under the reddish flames of a sunset, players and hunters begin to gather in the vicinity of the scene, preparing to return from their grueling and heavy group hunts. The boy lifts his eyes, fixing his deep orbs on a dark, rotating dimensional portal that seems to suck the energy around it, floating imposingly above the empty and desolate terrain, about to collapse in on itself. With his shoulders relaxed in a calculating gaze after the crushing victory seconds ago, Jinwoo breathes the thin air there and sighs, focused, saying in a low voice that he needs to arrange and finalize a mandatory system configuration before the daily shutdown. A finger presses a green button embedded at the top of his jacket's buckle with a metallic click, immediately cutting off the Central's recordings, ensuring his subsequent secrets are kept in the absolute secrecy of his own consciousness, just so he can act behind the scenes. Silence swallows the mountain winds as he dictates to himself the new farming guidelines, asserting that the brutal daily training of team automation must begin in the dead of night, starting from this exact instant, without any waste whatsoever. In a swift flash, the digital interfaces system displays the long-awaited holographic configuration window for the automatic battle mode, solemnly asking if he wishes to keep the current squad running on an infinite repetitive grind in his absence, most golden dream of any mobile game addict. The visual explanation dominates the frame, didactically detailing the insane mechanic where the app's auto-battle was emulated exactly as it existed in the old game, allowing that if the monsters were victorious and cleared the challenges on their own, the system would process the invisible turns, yielding gold and rewards as direct prizes without him having to tire himself with their sword swings. The little fairy Ramba crazily throws money across the ceiling under a blinding flash of gold, while the young man's Machiavellian mind reflects ecstatically, pointing out that the system's greatest trick is based on the maxim that the stronger the team and the less time taken in the automatic slaughter in the tombs, the greater the rain of coins would be, falling into his lap without him moving a centimeter, guaranteeing wealth and stratospheric profits without moving his muscles for it at night. A suspicious shadow crosses the tired face of the sergeant trainer in the hologram, and the boy slides the tab, designating and programming each one under risk, and at the last minute, to their surprise, quickly asking again if the partners would agree to proceed with the dungeon even though they are exhausted. The emerald wings vibrate intensely under the direct command in a sea of glitter, proudly announcing through the system and instantly summoning the Queen of Support to the field, the little chatterbox, the X-rank wind fairy, prepared for the slave labor of the Korean Knights. The boy turns his head, casually pointing at the muscular sergeant instead of her, asking without a heavy conscience for Ramba to head the nightly exploration management and take care of the continuous loop of fights in the Monday Rift alone, in place of the heavy brutes, leaving his partner and the sergeant himself in a stunned and comical shock, asking why the battalion's head trainer, which he was, had been benched from the automatic massacre. He smiles maliciously and with his arms crossed, rubs it in his partner's faces, dictating the simple cruelty of his player level, stating that the figure of Hunjio urgently needed time to train the backup summons in the main cave, dryly rebuffing Ramba when the girl asked if she could arm wrestle with the fairy, whining at the cold shoulder of his cynical and laughing refusal of the fairy who had hoped for training in bed. A cinematic tape falls before Ramba's paralyzed eyes, reliving the macabre nightmare with a comical gray filter, showing the sergeants beating the team, the immoral sessions, the exhaustive healing spells in the infernal courtyard. The sergeant bizarrely beats the recruits in the courtyard, with Ramba mentally rewatching her desperate tears from when she almost drowned her entire stamina bar, crawling on the ground and crying with rage at the methodical cruelty of her day and the bloody training behind the scenes, tremblingly concluding the comical torture of his nightly punishments on the troops there, outside the protagonist's main command. The big sergeant crosses his arms in our protagonist's memory, reinforcing the image of a brutal and merciless training. Back in reality, Jinwoo announces that they will take advantage of the momentum to clear all the other daily dungeons, while Ramba, completely exhausted, agrees, lying on the ground. The boy observes the floating interface, commenting that he will probably spend the rest of his life stuck in that place. With a satisfied smile, he points to the system's slots, explaining that the automatic combat will accumulate rewards, and then he will train the rest of the summons, forming a perfectly efficient routine with zero waste. The little fairy works hard in the background, surrounded by a red glow and sparks, affirming that her master can leave everything in her hands. Suddenly, our protagonist turns, surprised, upon noticing the red light of the dimensional rift dissipating behind him. Outside the dungeon, he is greeted with bows by an excited team, and the assistant smiles, confessing that he already knew he could count on him. The young man hands over a heavy black bag, guaranteeing that all the video recordings are saved inside. Director Jaya politely asks if he needs anything else, and the boy thanks her, declining the offer. With a confident smile, the woman assures him that the material will not leak, telling him not to worry about the news in the media. Leaning her face closer, she changes her tone and confesses that this time, she wouldn't mind at all if the news about the record-breaking spread, catching the boy by surprise. Jinwoo adjusts his jacket and walks away, agreeing with the idea but seriously demanding that they guarantee his family's protection. He sighs, worried, remembering that gangs continue to run rampant freely throughout South Korea. Stopping for a second, the young man argues that since Ubik manages him exclusively, the company has a duty to provide a much stricter security scheme. Jaya closes her eyes, understanding the gravity of the request, and vows that she will protect them even if she has to call upon the full power of the Daeseong Corporation. The system announces the completion of the dungeon with a bizarre time of 3 minutes and 10 seconds, while Jinwoo relaxes next to his reptile and a small blue falcon. The boy confesses to himself that he only used the painted Komodo dragon to clear the rift because he was recording and suspects that this time is already enough for a world record. Analyzing the beasts, he deduces that if he equips the reptile with movement speed runes, its performance would be even more lethal. With a sharp smile, our protagonist projects that by maximizing the winged falcon to grant a speed buff, breaking the record would become child's play, and with the right training, he could even beat the 1-minute mark. The recording of the Tuesday dungeon is finally completed, and the young man walks towards the glowing portal, ready to move on. The scene cuts to the icy Wednesday dungeon, an environment covered in ice and snow where one can get defense runes, and which has a very annoying peculiarity. The boy's boot sinks into the thick snow as he tries to formulate his thought. Shivering from head to toe and his teeth chattering, Jinwoo concludes that the extreme cold of that place is strong enough to drastically restrict movement speed. Clutching his phone with frozen hands, he grumbles quietly that he's literally freezing to death. To deal with the situation, the young man summons the winged falcon and an ice cat with white fur and large eyes. Immediately after, the titanium golem, the horned fairy, and the explosive dragon mage appear on the battlefield, completing the team. The fluffy feline breathes the icy air with tranquility, proving to its master that a summon with cold resistance is absolutely indispensable there. Jinwoo approaches the red-haired mage, feeling the heat emitted by her, and lets out a sigh of relief for finally being able to warm up a bit in the middle of that blizzard. With his vision focused through the white gust, the young man murmurs, asking to see what awaits them further ahead. Immediately, a white-furred monster resembling a yeti leaps over the rocks, letting out a bestial roar towards the group. Without wasting time, our protagonist calls for the enormous titanium golem, ordering it to spring into action. The boy gives the instruction for the stone monster to amplify the strength of its own shield, creating a resistant barrier. Immediately, he shouts for the winged falcon as the blue bird dives through the air, cutting through the blizzard. The young man explains that with the bird's movement speed buff, the slow golem will be able to traverse the scenery incredibly quickly. The metallic monster advances like a war tank, while Jinwoo and the mage climb onto its wide arm to catch a ride. The titanium creature runs brutally through the snowy mountains, crushing the ground with each heavy step. The aggressive rocking of the run starts to affect our protagonist, who turns pale and nauseous. Holding his own mouth to keep from throwing up, the boy grumbles that the ride is thrilling but is making him completely dizzy. Along the way, one of the furious Yetis swings an ice club, trying to intercept the group. Without even slowing down, the golem collides with the enemy, shattering its weapon and sending the monster flying. Jinwoo recovers from his nausea and rests a hand on his forehead, praising the titanium beast's performance as the perfect defensive tank. The young man narrows his eyes as he observes a rocky obstacle ahead and says with a mysterious tone that the monster's utility doesn't end there. The metal boot sinks into the snow, preparing for the imminent impact. The golem delivers a devastating punch, destroying the massive ice wall, proving that forcing a path through blocked routes saves an absurd amount of time in exploration. With the passage clear, the boy looks back and tells the explosive dragon mage to prepare for the final combat, and she nods in agreement. The redhead fixes her gaze on the horizon, maintaining total concentration as thermal energy accumulates around her. The impact of their steps echoes through the ice walls of the cave, announcing the team's approach. A swift shadow leaps through the air in a bluish flash, anticipating the arrival of the definitive confrontation. The system's red alert flashes intensely, warning of the appearance of the boss monster right in front of the golem. A colossal alpha yeti with glowing eyes appears in the scenery, letting out a terrifying roar that makes the cave tremble. Clinging to the stone shoulder, Jinwoo wastes no time and shouts, calling for the horned fairy to spring into action. The small creature floats gracefully, spreading its shining magic over the area, weakening the furry beast's aggressive posture. With the target vulnerable, the master commands the final attack, ordering the mage to release the explosion immediately. The girl answers the call, unleashing a swirling inferno of flames from her magic staff. The power materializes in the form of a gigantic fire dragon that engulfs the boss monster, incinerating it in an instant. The victory notification shines, revealing the incredible time of 4 minutes and 22 seconds, as the boy punches the air, celebrating the result. The group rests in the middle of the snowy clearing after the rift has been completely pacified by the mage's fire. Jinwoo displays a proud smile, noting that he has managed to set another new record for his collection. However, the smile suddenly vanishes, and his face turns green again as nausea hits him hard. The invincible hero of the dungeons ends up kneeling in the snow, choking and fighting his own stomach because of the motion sickness from the ride, while the mage panics behind him, not knowing how to help. From that exact moment, cell phone screens across the country began to be bombarded with news about the absurd new record for the Wednesday dungeon. On the streets, people commented in shock as they read the boy's name, asking where this beak Jinwoo came from. A young woman in the middle of the street turns her head, vaguely remembering that this same name had already appeared, breaking the Tuesday rift not long ago. The newspaper headlines blared in bold letters that South Korea had finally started to pay attention to the emergence of this mysterious figure. The imposing image of Jinwoo remains in the shadows as newspapers fly around him, solidifying his new national fame. In a coffee shop, a group of young people discusses the matter, with one of them reminding the others that this is the mysterious guy from the community forums. The boys are stunned, trying to process the fact that a complete unknown broke the sacred record of the famous veteran Kang Jin-ho. Reading the newspaper, a man mutters, impressed, that the young man doesn't even seem to belong to the high ranks, appearing out of nowhere like an unstoppable comet. The media panic intensifies as the Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday rifts fall consecutively under the recruit's dominion, proving to be an unprecedented event. An executive's hand slams hard on the table, indignant, as he reads the headline, questioning if the Thursday dungeon would be the next victim of the Jinwoo hurricane. Inside an elegant office, a middle-aged assistant checks his tablet and mutters thoughtfully about the young man's true identity. The employee reports to his elderly boss, seated in the armchair, that this is precisely the boy mentioned by Counselor Park Chang-seok in previous meetings. The old man recalls that it was this same kid who proposed trading the secret strategies of the dungeons in exchange for receiving the summons in advance, an idea that Congressman Lim Hee-soo made a point of blocking. A memory of the arrogant, red-haired rival comes to their minds, confirming that the congressman denied the money because the boy refused to hand over the tactics first. Leaning his head back in the armchair and letting out a long sigh, the mustached executive admits defeat, acknowledging that the boy's information was indeed valuable, feeling the bitter taste of having missed the chance to close that multi-million-dollar deal. In the executive's memory, Congressman Lim Hisu smiles arrogantly, proving that he really had a good point back then. The political landscape, however, is measured purely by results, as the popularity graphs display an overwhelming victory of 59%. Park Chang-seok imagines a glorious scene where the association supports Baek Jinwoo, guaranteeing not only public praise but also an absurd amount of additional votes. Disappointed with the situation, the counselor shakes his head and affirms that Lim Hisu completely lost his touch by kicking away a blessing that fell right at his feet. Determined to fix the mistake, the mustached man immediately calls his first secretary, and the young man in the suit responds promptly with a tablet in hand. The big guy orders his subordinate to contact the player named Baek Jinwoo once again, leaving the assistant shocked at the idea of approaching him directly. The examiner justifies the order with a serious look, confessing that at first he thought the boy was a fraud, but he proved to be the real deal, and that's why they need to bring him back no matter what. The scene changes to the dimensional rifts, where the system details that the Monday and Wednesday dungeons provide valuable combat runes. The panel also shows a glowing vial, indicating that the Tuesday rift is the main source of abrasive items. Jinwoo's firm steps echo on the rocky floor as he mentally completes the explanation. Our protagonist walks side by side with the training instructor through an arid and desolate desert. The holographic screen displays a golden book, confirming that the Thursday dungeon rewards players with coveted skill books, although they do not contain unique powers for the summons. The boy observes his military partner and points out that these rifts also don't grant the potential abilities that only the instructor can unlock. The big sergeant agrees with his arms crossed, warning that in any case the place drops other quite useful techniques, which makes the exploration very advantageous. Jinwoo waves goodbye to the fairy Ramba and celebrates the fact that thanks to this repetition of rewards, they don't have to wear themselves out running in the Sunday dungeon, since both provide the same books. Our protagonist calmly drinks a juice with sunglasses on, stating that the Thursday dungeon ends up being much easier to deal with. Jinwoo sleeps soundly in his bed next to the little fairy, relieved not to have to repeat the same tiring routine all the time, which is why the entire team decided to take Sundays off. The peaceful atmosphere vanishes, giving way to an apocalyptic scene full of red system alerts, ironically questioning how easy this rift really is. A colossal stone boss monster appears with a bang, revealing that this challenge boils down to facing the boss the exact moment the player enters the map. The creature's red eyes glow in the shadows as the narrator highlights that this boss has an physically absurd defense. The standard strategy adopted by common players involves the use of specific beasts to deal with this immense resistance. The young man manipulates the blue panel and explains that the classic trick is to use a B-rank white wolf, which has an ability focused on reducing the target's defense. However, Jinwoo's elite squad is already perfectly positioned on the rocky terrain, ready to completely ignore the conventional rules. The boss's stone fist descends, tearing through the air with crushing force towards the group. The titanium golem intercepts the brutal blow without retreating an inch, as the master declares that the enemy's defense means nothing if you simply overwhelm it with extreme damage. The boy lowers his face with a drop of sweat on his forehead, admitting with frustration that he could never put this hunt video for sale on the market. He argues that the recording teaches nothing useful, as the tactic boils down to blindly beating the creature using the world's most overpowered squad, comparing the situation to a cooking recipe that's impossible to copy. With a cunning smile, Jinwoo decides that in the final guide, he will just instruct buyers to use the white wolf to break the defense and then attack with a high damage composition. The titanium golem advances under the master's command, who points out that there are still some essential secret tips to break the time record. Our protagonist points directly at the giant creature, revealing that the main secret is to focus all blows on the enemy golem's earth head, which acts as its only weak point. Jinwoo's titanium monster raises its massive arm as the young man explains that it is precisely because of this high weak point that he chose to use this giant summon on the front line. Ramba spins her staff, spreading an emerald aura, while the winged falcon flies over the area, ensuring that the speed buffs are at their maximum level. Jinwoo extends his hand forward with a merciless look and calls for the explosive dragon mage and the training instructor. The master delivers the definitive order, demanding that all the team's raw damage be concentrated exclusively on the enemy's head. The titanium golem obeys instantly, landing an uppercut that shatters the boss's stone jaw with a violent crack. The force of the impact unbalances the colossal creature, sending rocks flying everywhere as the monster tries to stay on its feet. Seizing the perfect opening, the instructor leaps through the air with the agility of a predator, ready to continue the combo. The sergeant's fist sinks into the boss's cratered face, drawing a deep, muffled roar from the stone beast as it begins to crumble. The explosive dragon mage joins the dance, spinning her staff with mastery as fiery magic circles form around her. The girl's red eyes glow intensely under the infernal light, preparing the ultimate incantation to finish the fight. A gigantic dragon of pure fire erupts from the staff, roaring fiercely and illuminating the entire dungeon with the heat of its magic. The flaming blast collides directly with the target's weak point, engulfing the upper part of the monster in an overwhelming explosion. The decapitated body of the earth golem collapses heavily onto the rocky ground, completely carbonized and defeated, with no chance to react. The mage's boot touches the ground gently as the smoke begins to clear on the newly pacified battlefield. The blue holographic panel pops up on the screen, congratulating the player for eliminating the boss and setting an insane completion time of just 5 minutes and 10 seconds. Jinwoo displays the floating plaque with the final time, celebrating that they managed to cut a whole minute from the Korean national record without breaking a sweat. The boy watches the sergeant walk through the rubble and admits to himself that the training instructor is definitely a way too broken unit. Despite his ally's absolute power, the young man crosses his arms and reveals that he does not plan to use the military man as the main unit for his target dungeon in the future. Our protagonist closes his eyes with a confident smile, arguing that this is all because he only needs a single, very well-leveled explosive dragon mage. The redhead displays a proud smile, holding her glowing staff, as Jinwoo affirms that with the right evolution, even the highest-level rifts can be cleared in a single second. The master nods, praising the mage's good work, and jokes that later on, if they only count the time to enter and exit the portal, the entire attack shouldn't even last 10 seconds. The instructor turns his head seriously, awaiting the next orders from his relentless commander. Without giving the team a break, the boy focuses on the new mountainous scenery and shouts excitedly, telling everyone to get ready for another round of slaughter. Time moves on, and Jinwoo's figure crosses the blue glow of a dimensional portal, stepping back into the polished lobby of the headquarters. Right at the exit, two well-dressed men in suits intercept the boy, politely asking if he is the player named Baek Jinwoo. The young man stops walking and confirms his identity, frowning and asking what they want with him. The man in front extends his hand and hands over an elegant business card, stating that they are part of the direct secretariat of the association's director. Jinwoo takes the card with a neutral expression, just letting out a murmur of understanding as he reads the printed title. Our protagonist questions the reason for the surprise approach, pointing out that all his pending matters with the headquarters should already be perfectly resolved. The secretary displays a fake corporate smile and replies that the board has carefully reviewed the business proposal the boy had mentioned last time. The executive tries to continue his speech, saying that since the boy has finally proven his results, the association has decided to look at the request positively, but Jinwoo raises his hand, cutting him off on the spot. The boy gives a relaxed smile and waves his hand dismissively, telling them to just let it go and not bother anymore. The secretary tries to insist on the conversation, forcing the issue that they came with the official answer about the exchange of information for summons. The suit-clad man repeats that the board is willing to accept the terms now that the proofs have been recorded, but Jinwoo extends his palm in the man's face, asking for silence once again. Our protagonist turns his back to the duo and tells them to completely forget the proposal, ending the matter right there. The two employees are left with blank faces, completely stunned, and ask what he means by that. A dark smile crosses the boy's lips as he ironically repeats the words about reviewing results, finding the headquarters' attitude pathetic. The young man's mind compares the angelic agility of Director Jaya, who simply dumped $1.5 billion into his account on the spot, with the excruciatingly slow and excuse-filled bureaucracy of the old-timers at the headquarters. Jinwoo crosses his arms, annoyed by the fact that the guys are trying to package a late refusal in a pretty speech, concluding that the association is the complete opposite of the efficiency of his new business partner. The secretary takes a step forward, trying to salvage the embarrassing situation while stammering a justification. Our protagonist points to his own ear and decrees in a firm voice that he has already signed an exclusivity contract with a company, warning that any future matters must be handled directly with the representative of the Ubik agency. The boy waves a relaxed goodbye, walking away, while the two employees are left standing in the lobby, trying to process the name of the unknown agency. The younger assistant looks confused at his superior and asks quietly what the heck this Ubik agency is. The older secretary starts to break into a cold sweat, his eyes widening as he connects the dots, desperately murmuring that the woman's name mentioned by the boy probably refers to the legitimate heiress of the monstrous Disiang group. A look of pure terror takes over the employee's face as he orders them to investigate this immediately, confessing with a bitter taste in his mouth that they just kicked away the biggest opportunity of their lives. Our protagonist goes up to the rooftop of a tall building and concludes that this open space will be perfect for his plan. With the wind blowing through his hair, he takes a deep breath and prepares for the next challenge of the week. The Friday dungeon differs from all the other rifts faced so far, as the main objective does not involve hunting monsters. To clear this specific stage, the player himself must personally run across the map, while the summons take a back seat. Faced with this unique mechanic, Jinwoo accesses the system panel and decides that he needs to start practicing immediately so as not to look bad. The boy's finger quickly taps the blue summoning button, activating the magic light on the rooftop. A whirlwind of wind and energy takes over the sky, revealing the impressive summon of a B-rank sky wyvern. The young man admires the flying creature, feeling the force of the air currents generated by its gigantic wings. Looking down at the abyss of the street below, he confesses that the height is terrifying, but reassures himself by remembering that the system's shield prevents him from a fatal fall. The winged beast stares at its master with yellow eyes and lets out a curious hiss when our protagonist calls it by the name of Sky. With calm steps, Jinwoo approaches the edge of the building and strokes the wyvern's scales. He climbs onto the creature's back and asks in an excited tone if the flying beast is ready for the journey. The sky wyvern dives from the top of the skyscraper in a low-flying swoop as the boy shouts the order to head straight for the East Sea. The absurd speed of the freefall catches our protagonist off guard, making the air violently cut his face. Clinging tightly to the beast's neck, he widens his eyes and lets out a cry of adrenaline, realizing the surreal intensity of that free dive. The strong wind hits the young man's smiling face as he confesses that he finds the experience of flying much more fun than he had imagined. Full of excitement, he hugs the beast and shouts for them to go all out, tearing through the metropolis's sky. The landscape cuts to the beautiful and sunny coast of Yangyang, where the waves break calmly on the blue sea. On the sandy beach, the training instructor claps emotionally, praising his lord's incredible flight adaptation speed. The big sergeant cries with pure admiration, highlighting the master's genius, while Jinwoo responds, a bit awkwardly, that his skill isn't all that. The flame mage approaches, shaking her head, and confirms that his talent is truly out of the ordinary. She recalls the apprentice days in the game, recounting the nightmares the main story characters suffered to learn how to ride those winged beasts and dolphins. With flushed cheeks, the redhead smiles, enchanted, exalting that Jinwoo is the true supreme master, which makes the boy thank her for the compliment while the sergeant cries in the background, feeling wronged by the attention. Our protagonist sighs, changing the focus of the conversation and turning his attention back to the vast blue ocean. He points to the water and confirms with the team that the next step of the training will be practicing riding the sky dolphin. The boy places his trust in the mage and the sergeant, stating that learning from their experience will be the fastest method, and both accept the mission with absolute loyalty. A few days of intensive training pass, and the scene cuts to the entrance of an illuminated and vibrant virtual environment. The interior of the Friday dungeon is revealed to be a surreal race course full of floating colored blocks and geometric obstacles on a checkered track. In front of the obstacle course, Jinwoo displays a confident smile, snapping his fingers to start the race. The holographic window announces that the trial will begin in 10 seconds as our protagonist summons the Winged Falcon, remembering that this special rune rift was the definitive reason he earned the title of Time Attack God. The young man orders the bird to grant the maximum speed bonus, and the falcon obeys with a shrill screech. Strengthened by the magic, Jinwoo positions himself at the starting line, flexing his legs as the system begins the countdown. The giant floating numbers mark the final 3 seconds on the empty racetrack. The boy's gaze sharpens the exact moment the timer hits the final mark. A flash signals the start, and our protagonist shoots off like a rocket, leaving a trail of energy on the checkered track. The burst of movement creates a boom in the air, evidencing the absurd power of the falcon's speed buff. The hunter skillfully dodges several magic projectiles, moving his body from side to side without losing the race's rhythm. Faced with a sudden wall, he slides on the ground, his jacket grazing the track, to pass under the obstacle with perfection. The young man nimbly jumps between the floating platforms and confesses that performing these maneuvers physically is infinitely more exciting than using a video game controller. He lands perfectly on the next platform, displaying a smile full of adrenaline from the intense experience. His confident posture remains as he announces that it's time to access the stage's first secret route. Instead of following the obvious path, the boy jumps straight into the void towards the flooded section of the map. Jinwoo explains that the normal tactic would be to run over the water, dodging the surface blockades slowly and dangerously. Breaking all the rules of the conventional route, the young man dives headfirst with force, raising a gigantic column of water as he breaks the surface. Submerged in the virtual ocean, the master extends his hand and immediately conjures his aquatic mount, shouting the name of the sky dolphin. A majestic blue dolphin appears in the middle of the waters, answering its tamer's call. The boy hugs the aquatic creature, spreading sparkling stars of pure satisfaction from the team's perfect synchrony. An explosion of bubbles and foam marks the beast's violent movement in the depths of the flooded track. Clinging to the summon's fin, Jinwoo easily cuts through the waters and reveals that moving underneath completely bypasses the trap-filled track on the surface. The young man's gaze focuses on the exit of the submerged tunnel, calculating the exact moment for the next mount transition. The dolphin leaps out of the ocean in an elegant arc, and our protagonist takes advantage of the aerial momentum to shout for the sky wyvern. Suspended in the air at full speed, the master dismisses the aquatic creature and decrees the change of strategy for the final stretch. The hunter's boot lands firmly on the rigid scales of the wyvern that was perfectly summoned beneath him. The immense Bureaucratic beast flaps its wings forcefully, cutting through the winds as Jinwoo celebrates the start of the flight route. A gigantic vertical wall appears, blocking the main track, but the boy simply orders his mount to fly over it, ignoring the ground traps once and for all. From high in the skies, our protagonist spots the enormous finish line glowing at the end of the geometric course. The wind whips the boy's face as he focuses his vision on the final portal, determined to set the perfect time. The wyvern dives in a mind-blowing low pass, crossing the victory arch as the system confirms he has reached his destination. The blue dungeon completion plaque flashes, displaying the bizarre time of just 2 minutes and 16 seconds, making the hunter punch the air with pure joy. The system throws virtual confetti, effusively congratulating him for breaking yet another South Korean record, and Jinwoo celebrates on the wyvern's back, knowing he has completely mastered the game's tactics in real life.